The air reaches your face first, cool and clean, carrying with it the scent of pine resin and distant snow. You stand at the threshold of a small wooden house, its beams dark with age and smoke, its roof weighted down by stones arranged in careful overlapping rows. The mountains rise around you on every side, their peaks dissolving into mist, their slopes clothed in forest that grows thinner as the elevation climbs. This is the high country, the place where stone and sky meet, where winter arrives early and departs late, where the question of warmth is not a comfort but a matter of survival. You are not a visitor here. You were born in this village, as were your parents, and their parents before them, in an unbroken line that stretches back beyond the reach of any written record. Your hands know the weight of an axe, the grain of split wood, the rough texture of wool spun from the sheep that graze the high meadows in summer. Your body knows the rhythms of this place, the long dark of December, the brief exultant green of July, the anxious weeks of October when the harvest must be gathered and the animals brought down from the Alpine pastures before the first serious snow closes the passes and seals the village away from the world below. It is late autumn now, that threshold season when every clear day is a gift and every night a reminder. The sun sets early behind the western peaks, and the shadows lengthen quickly across the narrow valley floor. You have been working since first light, as has everyone in the village, preparing for the cold months ahead. There is wood to be stacked, fodder to be stored, roofs to be checked for gaps where wind might enter, walls to be inspected for cracks that will let the precious heat escape. These tasks are familiar to you, woven into the fabric of your years, returning with the same inevitability as the seasons themselves. Before you continue with the day's work, consider this. There are stories here, embedded in the smoke-darkened beams above your head, in the smooth stones of the hearth, in the thick wool blankets folded on the wooden benches that line the walls. These stories speak of ingenuity and adaptation, of communities that learn to thrive in places that seem, at first glance, inhospitable to human life. If you find value in such stories, in the quiet wisdom of those who came before, in the practical poetry of survival, then subscribe now to receive more narratives like this one, tales designed to accompany you into rest, to carry you gently towards sleep while expanding your understanding of how people have lived, how they have solved the fundamental problems of existence in 1,000 different ways across 1,000 different landscapes. Let these words be both comfort and education, a soft voice in the darkness that makes you, slowly, imperceptibly, more knowledgeable even as your consciousness releases its grip on the waking world. The house in which you stand is typical of this region, built according to principles refined over centuries. Its foundation is stone, massive blocks fitted together without mortar, their weight and friction holding them in place through winter avalanches and spring floods alike. Above this foundation rises a frame of timber, heavy beams joined with careful carpentry, each joint designed to allow the structure to flex slightly under the burden of snow without cracking or collapsing. The walls are thick, filled with a mixture of clay and straw that hardens into an effective insulator, keeping the cold out and the warmth in. The roof is low-pitched, allowing snow to accumulate in a thick blanket that becomes, paradoxically, another layer of insulation, a frozen quilt that helps to seal the living space below against the killing cold of January and February. But the true heart of this house, the element that makes human life possible at this altitude, is the stove. It stands against the back wall, a massive construction of stone and clay, its body rising from floor almost to ceiling, its surface decorated with ceramic tiles that glow in the firelight. This is not a simple fireplace, open to the room. It is something more sophisticated, more efficient, a technology developed over generations to extract the maximum possible warmth from every piece of wood that burns within it. You approach it now, running your hand along its surface. The stone is warm to the touch, pleasantly so, a gentle radiant heat that spreads outward in all directions. This warmth is constant, even though no fire burns at this moment. The stone holds heat the way a lake holds water, storing it, releasing it slowly over many hours. You know that if you were to light a fire in this stove at dawn, feeding it steadily for 2 or 3 hours until the stone mass reached its full temperature, the house would remain comfortably warm until well after dark, long after the flames had died down to ash and ember. Your grandmother explained this to you when you were young, taking your small hand and placing it against the stove's flank. Feel that? She asked, her voice soft, her accent shaped by the dialect of these mountains. That is how we survive. Not by burning everything we have all at once, but by storing the heat, by using it slowly, by respecting what the fire gives us. She was teaching you more than the mechanics of heating. She was teaching you a philosophy, a way of thinking about resources and time and the relationship between human need and natural law. The design of the stove is ingenious. The firebox itself is relatively small, just large enough to accept logs of a certain length, split to a certain thickness. From this firebox, the smoke does not rise directly up and out through a chimney as it would in a simpler design. Instead, it is forced to travel through a series of channels built into the body of the stove, a maze of passages that wind back and forth, up and down, ensuring that the hot gases give up their heat to the surrounding stone before finally exiting through the chimney at the top. This means that the heat of combustion, the energy released when wood transforms into flame and gas, does not simply vanish up into the sky. It is captured, held, converted into warmth that will last through the long Alpine night. You learned to build fires in this stove when you were old enough to be trusted with such responsibility, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. It is not as simple as it might appear. The wood must be dry, properly seasoned, stored for at least a year after cutting so that the moisture within the cells evaporates, leaving only the combustible cellulose and lignin. Wet wood produces more smoke than heat, and smoke that does not burn completely leaves deposits of creosote in those winding channels, narrowing them, reducing the stove's efficiency, creating the danger of a chimney fire that could consume the entire house. The size and arrangement of the wood matters too. You begin with kindling, small dry twigs and splinters of resinous pine that catch easily from the spark of flint and steel. Upon this foundation you build a structure of increasingly larger pieces, allowing air to circulate, allowing the fire to breathe and establish itself before you add the larger logs that will sustain the burn. There is an art to it, a feel that comes only with practice, an intuition about when to add more wood and when to hold back, when to adjust the damper to allow more air and when to restrict it to slow the burn and extend the heat. The wood itself comes from the forest that surrounds the village, a resource that is both abundant and carefully managed. You do not simply go into the forest and cut whatever tree catches your eye. There are rules, established by the community over generations, rules about which trees may be cut and which must be left standing, rules about sustainable harvest that ensure the forest will continue to provide for your children and their children in turn. You take the dead trees first, the ones brought down by wind or age or lightning. You thin the crowded areas where young trees compete too intensely for light and water, selecting the weaker specimens and leaving the strong to grow into their full potential. You favor certain species for firewood, beech and oak for their density and long-lasting coals, pine and fir for their ease of splitting and quick ignition, while preserving others for construction timber, for tool handles, for the 100 other uses that wood serves in a mountain community. In summer, when the high pastures are in use and the animals graze the steep meadows above the tree line, you make trips into the forest with your neighbors, working together to fell the selected trees, to cut them into manageable lengths, to split them and stack them in covered shelters where air can circulate and the sun and wind can do their slow work of drying. This is hard labor, the kind that leaves your shoulders aching and your hands blistered, but there is satisfaction in it too, the satisfaction of providing for your family's needs, of building up a reserve against the certain hardship of winter. By autumn, the wood is ready. You bring it down from the forest, load by load, on sleds or in baskets carried on your back, and you stack it in the shed attached to your house, within easy reach when the snow comes and outdoor work becomes difficult or impossible. The sight of that stacked wood, row upon row of split logs, is deeply reassuring. It represents warmth, survival, the continuation of life through the season of cold. You can estimate, just by looking, whether you have enough to last until spring, and if there is any doubt, you make more trips, cut more wood, extend your margin of safety. But wood is not the only fuel that feeds the stove. In this high country, timber is precious, and the wise household supplements its wood supply with other materials. There is dung from the cattle and sheep, collected through the summer months when the animals are out on pasture, dried in the sun until it becomes light and crumbly, almost odorless, burning with a slow steady heat that is perfect for the overnight fire, the long burn that will keep the stove's stone mass warm while the household sleeps. There are fallen branches and cones from the pine trees, gathered by children sent into the forest with baskets, their small hands perfect for the task of collecting these smaller fragments of fuel. There is even peat, in some areas, cut from the high bogs where partially decomposed plant matter has accumulated over centuries, sliced into blocks and stacked to dry, then burned for its slow smoldering heat. Each of these fuels has its own characteristics, its own best uses within the household's heating strategy. Wood burns hot and fast, ideal for bringing the stove up to temperature in the morning, for cooking the midday meal, for warming the house quickly when you return from outdoor work. Dung burns cooler and slower, perfect for maintaining a baseline warmth overnight or during the day when the household is busy with other tasks and cannot tend the fire constantly. Peat falls somewhere between, with a distinctive earthy smell that is not unpleasant, a reminder of the wet meadows and moss-covered stones where it was cut. You move away from the stove now and walk to the window, a small opening fitted with shutters that can be closed tightly against the wind. Through the wavy glass, expensive, brought up from the lowlands, installed only in the last generation, you can see the village spread out below you. There are perhaps 30 houses in all, clustered along the narrow valley floor where a stream runs, fed by snowmelt and springs, never freezing completely even in the depths of winter. Each house is similar to yours, built to the same essential plan, adapted to the same harsh environment. Smoke rises from several chimneys, thin pale ribbons ascending into the evening air, evidence of fires being lit for the evening meal, for the night's warmth. The village is old, far older than any structure that currently stands. People have lived in this valley for thousands of years, sheltering in caves at first, then in simple huts, gradually developing the skills and knowledge necessary to create more permanent, more comfortable dwellings. The current houses, with their massive stoves and thick insulated walls, represent the culmination of all that accumulated wisdom, a design refined through countless winters, each generation making small improvements, small adjustments, passing down their discoveries to those who came after. You think about this continuity often, especially as the days grow short and the first snow begins to fall. You are part of a chain, a link connecting past and future, inheriting knowledge from those who came before and responsible for passing it on to those who will come after. The techniques of survival in this place are not written in books, few people in the village can read, and books are rare and expensive in any case. The knowledge lives in hands and bodies, in the muscle memory of splitting wood and building fires, in the practiced eye that can judge the dryness of timber or the thickness of smoke, in the shared stories told around the evening hearth about winters past, about mistakes made and lessons learned. The light is fading now, the mountains darkening against a sky that still holds the last pale glow of day. You turn from the window and begin to prepare for the evening. There is wood to be brought in from the shed, enough for tonight and tomorrow morning. There is the fire to be built, carefully, according to the principles you have known since childhood. There is food to be prepared, simple but nourishing, designed to sustain the body through the long cold night. As you work, your movements are unhurried, economical. There is no waste here, no excess motion. Every action has been performed 1,000 times before and will be performed 1,000 times again. There is comfort in this repetition, in the certainty that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be done and exactly how to do it. The anxiety of choice, so common in other lives and other places, has little space here. The mountains impose their requirements, and you meet them, as your ancestors met them, with skill and endurance and a deep respect for the forces that shape this landscape. You carry an armload of wood from the shed, feeling its weight against your chest, smelling the faint sweet scent of resin that still clings to the split surfaces. Back inside, you arrange the wood beside the stove, selecting the pieces you will need for tonight's fire. The kindling goes in first, a small precise structure that will catch easily and burn hot enough to ignite the larger pieces. Then the medium-sized splits, arranged to allow airflow, to create the draft that will pull oxygen into the firebox and feed the flames. Finally, when the fire is well established, you will add the large logs, the ones that will burn through the evening and into the night, their heat absorbed by the stone mass of the stove, stored and radiated long after the visible flames have died. You strike the flint against the steel, sending sparks cascading onto a small bundle of dried grass and shredded bark. The grass catches, a tiny flame that you nurture with your breath, blowing gently, steadily, until the kindling ignites and the fire begins to climb through the carefully arranged wood. The light flickers on the walls, casting moving shadows, and warmth begins to radiate outward from the stove's iron door. You close the door but leave the damper open, allowing the fire to burn hot and fast at first, establishing itself, heating the stone. The house begins to warm. You can feel it in the air, a subtle softening of the chill that had crept in during the afternoon. The temperature will not rise quickly. This is not the sudden blast of heat you would get from an open fire. Instead, the warmth accumulates gradually, steadily, a gentle tide that rises slowly but inevitably, driven by the enormous thermal mass of the stove as it absorbs and then releases the heat of the burning wood. While the fire establishes itself, you prepare the evening meal. The food here is simple, shaped by what can be grown or raised in this harsh environment and by what can be stored through the long months when fresh food is unavailable. There is bread, baked in the oven built into the side of the stove, a dense dark loaf made from rye flour, hearty and sustaining. There is cheese, made from the milk of your cows and aged in the cool cellar beneath the house, its flavor sharp and complex. There are potatoes, boiled in an iron pot hung over the stove's hottest section, and perhaps a bit of preserved meat, smoked or salted in the autumn, a rare treat that adds flavor to the meal. You eat slowly, sitting on one of the wooden benches near the stove, feeling its warmth against your back. There is no conversation. You live alone in this house now, your parents gone, your siblings married and living in houses of their own elsewhere in the village. The solitude does not trouble you. You are accustomed to it, and in any case, the silence is not empty. It is filled with the small sounds of the house, the crackle and pop of burning wood, the faint tick of cooling metal, the whisper of wind around the eaves, the settling creak of ancient timbers adjusting to the day's changing temperatures. After the meal, you sit for a while, allowing your body to rest after the day's labor. The fire burns steadily in the stove, and you can feel its heat radiating outward, warming the air, warming the walls, warming the very stones of the foundation. This warmth is life itself in this place. Without it, without the knowledge of how to create and maintain it, human existence here would be impossible. The mountains would belong only to the animals adapted to cold, to the marmots that hibernate through winter in their deep burrows, to the chamois with their thick coats and their ability to find shelter among the rocks, to the eagles that soar above the peaks, indifferent to the temperature far below. But you are here, and your people have been here for countless generations, and you will be here tomorrow and the day after, kept alive by fire and stone and the accumulated wisdom of those who figured out, slowly, painfully, through trial and error and bitter experience, how to extract warmth from wood and hold it through the night, how to build houses that shed snow and resist wind, how to organize a community so that everyone contributes to the common survival and everyone benefits from the common store of knowledge. The light fades entirely now, and night settles over the village. You move to the window once more and push the shutter closed, latching it securely. The house is warm, comfortably so, the stove radiating its steady gentle heat. You add one more log to the fire, a large dense piece of oak that will burn slowly through the night, then close the damper most of the way, restricting the airflow, slowing the combustion, ensuring that the wood will last until morning. In the dim light cast by a single candle, you prepare for sleep. The bed is built into an alcove in the wall, a box-like structure enclosed on three sides, designed to trap warmth and create a small protected space within the larger room. The mattress is filled with straw, replaced fresh each autumn after the harvest, and covered with thick wool blankets woven by your mother years ago, their patterns traditional to this valley, each color and design carrying meaning that you learned as a child. You climb into the bed and pull the blankets over you. The wool is heavy and warm, slightly scratchy against your skin, smelling faintly of lanolin and wood smoke. From here, cocooned in blankets within the alcove, you can see the stove, its bulk reassuring in the darkness, a faint glow visible through the cracks around the door, evidence that the fire still lives, still produces heat, still guards against the cold that presses against the walls and roof of your house. Your eyes close. Your breathing slows. The day's work has left you tired in that good deep way that promises easy sleep. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. By morning there will be frost, perhaps even a dusting of snow on the highest peaks. But inside, wrapped in wool, protected by thick walls and that magnificent stove with its maze of channels and its great mass of stone holding hours and hours of captured warmth, you are safe. You are warm. You are home. You wake before dawn, as you always have, here in the high valley where the air still carries the bite of autumn frost even though summer ended weeks ago. The darkness inside your home is complete, thick and velvety, wrapping around you like a familiar cloak. You lie still for a moment, listening. Outside, the wind moves through the pine trees with a sound like distant water, steady and low. The wooden walls of your dwelling creak softly, settling into the cold, and you can feel the chill pressing against the blankets piled over you, wool upon wool, heavy and scratchy against your chin. This is the rhythm you have known since childhood, the cold arriving earlier each year as you climb higher into memory, into the seasons your grandparents described, when winters lasted longer and the snows came in walls of white that buried the lower pastures and made the village a small island of smoke and warmth in an ocean of ice. You sit up slowly, your breath forming a pale cloud in the darkness, and reach for the wooden box beside your sleeping platform. Inside, kept dry through careful attention, are the fire-making tools, flint, steel, a bundle of dried fungus harvested last spring from the trunk of a fallen birch. Your fingers know these objects without sight, and you work methodically, striking sparks into the char cloth until a tiny ember glows like a living jewel in your palm. You coax it into the nest of fine wood shavings you prepared the night before, blowing gently, steadily, watching the orange glow spread and strengthen. The first small flame arrives with a whisper, and you feed it splinters of pine rich with resin, then larger pieces of split firewood stacked within arm's reach. The fire grows, and with it comes the first true light of your day, casting long shadows that dance across the walls, across the low ceiling darkened by years of smoke, across the simple objects that make up your world, the spinning wheel in the corner, the wooden table worn smooth by generations of hands, the shelves holding clay pots and woven baskets. The hearth is the center of everything. It always has been. You know this not as an idea but as a fact as solid as the stone beneath your feet, as the mountains rising beyond your door. The hearth is where you cook, where you work, where you gather when the wind howls down from the peaks and rattles the shutters. It is where your grandmother sat to tell stories, where your mother carded wool through the long evenings, where you yourself have spent countless hours feeding the flames, tending the coals, learning the language of fire and wood and heat. But fire requires fuel, and fuel requires work that begins long before the cold arrives. You remember the summer just past, when the days stretched long and golden and the high meadows turned thick with grass and wildflowers. You remember climbing the steep paths above the village with your family, moving the cattle and goats to the higher pastures where they would graze until autumn. The Alm, the summer farm, sat in a fold of the mountain, a simple structure of stone and wood, surrounded by slopes where the animals could feed on the rich alpine grasses. You spent those months making cheese, cutting hay on the steepest slopes with a scythe whose handle had been worn smooth by your grandfather's hands, and always, always, gathering wood. The gathering never stopped. Every day that offered dry weather, you worked among the trees, selecting deadfall, cutting branches, splitting logs. The wood had to be gathered high, where the forest grew thin and the trees struggled against wind and cold and poor soil. You learned early which trees burned best, the resinous pine and larch for quick heat and light, the dense beech and oak for long-lasting coals, the birch with its papery bark that caught flame even when damp. You learned to read the wood, to see the subtle signs of rot, the holes left by beetles, the discoloration that meant the interior had begun to soften and would burn too fast, giving more smoke than warmth. Each piece you cut was carried down the mountain on your back, bundled in loads that bent you nearly double as you navigated the narrow paths. Your shoulders remember the weight, the constant pressure, the ache that settled deep into muscle and bone. The wood had to be stacked in the drying shed, arranged carefully so air could move between the pieces, so the sun could reach it, so the moisture could slowly leave the fibers and make it ready for burning. Green wood, freshly cut, still full of sap, would smoke and sputter and waste itself without giving proper heat. Dry wood, aged through a full summer and into autumn, would burn clean and hot and steady. The quantity required was staggering. You needed enough to last from the first snows of November until the thaw in April or May, sometimes longer, if winter lingered in the high country. A single household might require 20 or 30 cartloads of firewood, each load representing hours of labor in the forest. The largest households, those with many children or elderly members who needed constant warmth, required even more. The work was endless, cyclical, woven into the fabric of every year. But wood was not the only fuel. You learned early that in the high Alps, where trees grew scarce above certain elevations, other materials became precious. Peat, cut from the boggy areas where sphagnum moss had accumulated over centuries, could be dried and burned, though its smoke was thick and acrid and left a different kind of ash. Animal dung, collected from the pastures and dried in flat cakes under the summer sun, burned with a slow heat that was prized for its steadiness, especially in the long nights when you needed warmth without the labor of constantly feeding logs into the flames. You remember helping to make these dung cakes as a child, mixing the manure with straw and shaping it by hand, pressing it flat and leaving it on the rocks to harden. The smell was earthy, not unpleasant once you grew accustomed to it, and the work was meditative, repetitive. The cakes would be stacked like bricks in a sheltered place, and through the winter they would be rationed carefully, mixed with wood to stretch the supply, to ensure that no one ran out before spring arrived with its promise of renewal. The house itself was built to hold heat, though the design was born of centuries of trial and adaptation rather than any formal plan. The walls were thick, stone on the outside, sometimes plastered with a mixture of clay and straw, with an inner layer of wooden planks that provided additional insulation. The spaces between the stones were packed with moss, with mud, with whatever material could block the wind. The windows were small, few in number, often covered with oiled cloth or thin scraped hide rather than glass, which was expensive and fragile and difficult to transport to these remote places. The roof sat low and heavy, designed to shed snow and resist the fierce winds that tore across the ridges in winter. It was made of wooden shingles or thatch, weighted down with stones, and beneath it was often a layer of hay or dried moss, additional insulation that kept the warmth from escaping into the sky. The animals, the cow, the goats, the chickens, lived beneath the same roof, in a lower level or an attached structure, and their body heat rose through the floorboards, adding to the warmth of the human living space above. This arrangement was practical, efficient, born of necessity. In winter, when temperatures plunged far below freezing, when the winds could kill an exposed animal in hours, keeping the livestock close meant survival for everyone. You can smell it now, in memory, the mingled scents of hay and manure, of wool and wood smoke, of cooking food and unwashed bodies pressed together in the warmth. It was not unpleasant. It was the smell of life, of community, of shared struggle and shared comfort. Cleanliness, as lowland people understood it, was a luxury the mountains did not permit. Water had to be carried or melted from snow, and heating it required fuel that was always precious. You washed when you could, but full baths were rare, reserved for special occasions or the warm months when the streams ran full and the sun could dry your skin. The hearth itself was often a large open fireplace, set into the wall or in the center of the main room, with a chimney of stone that rose through the roof. The design varied from valley to valley, from region to region, reflecting local traditions and available materials. In some places, the hearth was a raised platform of stone, with a metal grate to hold the burning wood and allow air to flow beneath. In others, it was simply a cleared space on the floor, surrounded by stones to contain the embers, with the smoke rising to a hole in the roof. Later, as the centuries progressed, a different kind of heating device became common, the kachelofen, the tiled stove. You have seen these, touched their smooth ceramic surfaces, felt the way they radiate warmth long after the fire inside has died down. The design was ingenious, a firebox where wood was burned, connected to a series of channels and chambers through which the hot smoke and gases would travel, heating the ceramic mass before finally exiting through the chimney. The tiles absorbed the heat and released it slowly, steadily, over hours. A single firing in the morning could keep the stove warm through the day and into the night. These stoves were built by specialists, craftsmen who understood the mathematics of heat and airflow, who knew how to shape the interior passages so the smoke would linger long enough to transfer its energy but not so long that it would choke the fire. The tiles themselves were often beautiful, decorated with glazes in shades of green and blue and cream, sometimes bearing images, flowers, animals, saints. A fine cachalofen was a sign of prosperity, a centerpiece of the home, and families would gather around it, pressing their backs against its warmth, their hands spread on its surface. But whether the heat came from an open hearth or a tiled stove, the principle remained the same: fire transforms wood into warmth, and that warmth must be captured, held, distributed through the space where humans sleep and eat and work. The fire is never allowed to die completely if it can be helped. At night, before sleeping, you cover the coals with ash, burying them so they burn slowly, so a core of heat remains alive until morning. This is called banking the fire, and it is a skill passed down through generations. Too much ash and the coals suffocate. Too little and they burn away to nothing. The balance must be judged by eye, by experience, by the intuition that comes from tending fires every day of your life. In the coldest months, the entire household sleeps in the same room, clustering near the heat source. Privacy is a concept that belongs to warmer climates, to larger spaces, to people who do not need to share warmth to survive. Here, you sleep together, parents, children, grandparents, sometimes even trusted servants or hired laborers. The sleeping platforms are often built into the walls, box-like structures filled with straw or hay, covered with blankets and furs. You climb into these spaces and pull the blankets over yourself, cocooning against the cold, and you sleep lightly, waking periodically to check the fire, to add another log, to ensure the warmth continues. The clothing you wear is layered, practical, designed to trap heat. Wool is the foundation: wool socks, wool undergarments, wool tunics and trousers, wool cloaks. Linen is worn closest to the skin when available, but wool dominates because sheep can graze the high pastures and their fleece is readily available. You card it, spin it, weave it, knit it. The work is constant, filling the long winter evenings when outdoor labor is impossible. Your hands are never idle. There is always wool to process, always cloth to mend, always stockings to knit. Leather and fur are added for extra warmth: sheepskin vests, goat hide boots, caps lined with rabbit or marmot fur. Nothing is wasted. When an animal is slaughtered, every part is used: the meat for eating, the bones for tools and broth, the hide for leather, the fat for candles and soap, the sinews for thread. The animals give their lives, and in return you honor them by using everything, by wasting nothing, by ensuring their sacrifice sustains the community through the dark months. Food, too, is part of the strategy for warmth. Hot meals, soups, stews, porridges, are prepared throughout the day, simmering in iron pots hung over the fire. The heat from the cooking adds to the warmth of the room, and the food itself warms you from within. You eat root vegetables stored in the cellar, dried beans and grains, preserved meats, smoked, salted, cured. Bread is baked in outdoor ovens during the warmer months and stored, or baked in smaller quantities as needed, the dough sometimes cooked directly on hot stones near the hearth. The rhythm of winter is different from summer. In summer, you work outside from dawn until dusk, racing to complete the tasks that will sustain you through the cold. In winter, the work moves indoors, slows down, becomes more contemplative. You repair tools, carve wood, work leather, tell stories, teach the children skills they will need. The darkness lasts longer each day, and the light from the fire becomes the center of existence, a small sun around which the household orbits. You remember the stories your grandmother told, sitting by the fire with her hands always busy, always knitting or mending or spinning. She spoke of winters when the snow rose higher than the rooftops, when families tunneled through drifts to reach the barn, when entire weeks passed without seeing the sun. She spoke of the importance of preparation, of the disasters that befell those who underestimated the mountains, who ran out of wood or food, or who failed to maintain their roofs and found themselves buried under collapsing snow. She also spoke of the beauty, the crystalline silence after a heavy snowfall, the way the world seemed to hold its breath, the northern lights shimmering above the peaks like ghosts dancing. She spoke of the closeness that winter enforced, the bonds that formed when people depended absolutely on one another, when survival was a communal effort and no one could afford pride or selfishness. The heating of homes was never just a matter of technology or technique. It was woven into the entire social fabric, the economic structure, the spiritual life of the community. The forest was managed collectively in many places, with rules about where and when wood could be cut, how much each household could take, how the young trees would be protected so future generations would have fuel. These rules were enforced by tradition, by community pressure, sometimes by formal agreements recorded by the village council or the local lord. Gathering wood was often a communal activity, especially the larger tasks like felling old trees or clearing deadfall from avalanche zones. Groups of men would work together, sharing tools, sharing labor, sharing the harvest. The women and children would follow, bundling branches, carrying loads, gleaning every scrap. In the evenings, there would be shared meals, shared warmth, the telling of jokes and songs, the reinforcement of bonds that would be tested again and again through the long winter. The church, too, played a role. In many Alpine villages, the church was the only building with a large heated space, warmed by massive stoves or braziers during services. The faithful would gather not only for worship but for warmth, for the comfort of community, for the reminder that they were part of something larger than their individual struggles. The priest might bless the woodpiles, might pray for mild weather, might remind the congregation of their duties to one another, to share with those who had less, to check on the elderly and infirm, to ensure no one froze alone in the dark. There were folk traditions, too, beliefs that blended Christian teachings with older practices. Certain woods were considered lucky, others unlucky. Yule logs were selected with care, burned with ceremony, their ashes saved and scattered on the fields for fertility. The hearth fire was never allowed to go completely out on certain holy days, and the first fire of winter was kindled with rituals meant to ensure its strength and longevity. These practices gave meaning to the labor, transformed the practical work of heating into something sacred, something that connected you to the land, to your ancestors, to the cycles of nature. As you sit now by your own fire, feeling its warmth on your face, you understand that what you are doing is not simply keeping yourself comfortable. You are participating in a tradition thousands of years old, a tradition that has allowed humans to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The Alps are beautiful, yes, breathtaking in their grandeur, their stark peaks and deep valleys, their meadows bright with wildflowers in summer. But they are also merciless. They do not forgive mistakes. They do not grant second chances to those who are unprepared. Heat is life here. The ability to create and maintain warmth is the foundation upon which everything else rests. Without it, there is no survival. The knowledge of how to heat a home, how to gather fuel, how to build a fire, how to construct a dwelling that holds warmth, how to dress and eat and sleep in ways that conserve body heat, this knowledge is as essential as knowing how to find water or grow food. It is taught from infancy, absorbed through observation and practice, reinforced by necessity. You look around the room, at the familiar objects illuminated by firelight, and you feel a deep sense of continuity. Your great-great-grandparents sat in a room much like this one, warmed themselves by a fire much like this one, faced winters much like the one approaching. They survived, and so you are here. The chain remains unbroken. The knowledge has been passed down, adapted, refined, but never lost. Outside, the wind strengthens as dawn approaches, and you hear the first stirrings of the animals below. Soon it will be time to rise fully, to begin the day's tasks, to milk the cow, to feed the chickens, to check the woodpile, to prepare the morning meal. But for now, you remain still, watching the flames, feeling the heat, existing in this quiet moment that belongs only to you and the fire and the ancient, enduring rhythm of life in the high mountains. The fire crackles softly, and a log shifts, sending up a small shower of sparks that rise toward the darkened ceiling before winking out. You reach for another piece of wood, place it carefully on the coals, and watch as it catches, as the flames embrace it, as the heat continues, steady and reliable, the warmth that makes everything possible. You stand at the threshold of deep winter now, and the world around you has contracted to what can be held, what can be kept alive through intention and labor. The village clings to the mountainside as it always has, a gathering of dark roofs and pale smoke against the white enormity of the peaks, and you move through it with the knowledge that survival here has never been a matter of chance but of accumulated wisdom, passed hand to hand across centuries like coals carried in a clay pot from one hearth to another. The morning finds you in the communal barn, where the cattle stand in their patient rows, breathing warmth into the dim interior. You have learned by now that the animals are not merely livestock but collaborators in the intricate choreography of winter endurance. Their bodies are furnaces that ask only hay and water, and in return they offer heat that rises through the floorboards of the living quarters above, transforming the architecture itself into a kind of distributed hearth. The smell here is thick and organic, not unpleasant once you grow accustomed to it, the scent of fermentation and breath, of straw crushed beneath hooves, of milk and manure and the particular musk of large animals in close quarters. You run your hand along the wooden partition that separates one stall from another, feeling the grain beneath your palm, the slight dampness where condensation has formed in the cold. The wood is old, darkened by decades of use, and you can see where generations of hands have worn the surfaces smooth at certain points, where gates are opened and closed, where people steady themselves as they move between the animals. Above you, the ceiling is low and crossed with heavy beams, and you know that just beyond those beams is the floor of the room where the family sleeps, where children dream while the warmth of 30 cattle rises through the planks like a benevolent exhalation. This arrangement is not unique to this household. Throughout the valley, the same architecture repeats itself with minor variations, the animals below, the people above, the heat shared between species in a compact that predates any written record. You think of the lowland villages you once knew, where barns and houses stood separate, where the cold could slip between buildings and claim the spaces in between, and you understand now why such separation would be unthinkable here, where every degree of warmth is precious, where waste is measured not just in fuel but in human comfort, in children's health, in the ability to wake each morning with fingers that can still grip and work. The old man who tends the cattle moves beside you now, his movements economical and practiced. He does not speak much, but you have learned to read the language of his gestures, the way he runs his hand along a cow's flank to check her condition, the angle of his head when he listens to their breathing, the particular expression that crosses his face when he judges whether the animals have enough fodder to last until spring. He is teaching you without lectures, through proximity and repetition, and you absorb the lessons as your body absorbs the warmth that rises from the living floor of beasts. You help him distribute hay from the loft, forking it down into the wooden mangers, watching as the cattle turn their large heads toward the fresh fodder. The rhythmic sound of their chewing becomes a kind of music, steady and meditative, and you find your breathing synchronizing with theirs, your heartbeat slowing to match the peaceful cadence of digestion and rest. This is warmth not as spectacle but as process, as the patient conversion of summer's grass into winter's heat, and you are part of that conversion now, your own body another furnace in the network of warmth that keeps the household alive. When you climb the ladder to the living quarters above, you feel the temperature shift, not dramatically, but enough to notice. The floor is warm beneath your feet, almost startling after the cold stone of the path outside. The room is dim, lit only by the small windows set deep in the thick walls, and in the corner the ceramic stove stands like a monument, its surface decorated with glazed tiles and patterns of blue and white. This is the Cachalofen, the heart of the upper room, and you approach it with the reverence it deserves. The woman of the house is already there, opening the small iron door to feed more wood into the firebox. You watch as she selects each piece with care, not the largest logs, but medium-sized splits of spruce and larch, dry enough to burn cleanly but not so dry that they'll consume themselves too quickly. She arranges them with precision, creating spaces for air to flow, ensuring that the fire will burn steadily rather than flaring and dying. When she closes the door, the metal clangs softly, a sound that has punctuated every winter day in this house for longer than anyone can remember. You have learned that these ceramic stoves are themselves a kind of miracle, a technology refined over centuries to extract every possible measure of heat from wood. The fire burns in a hidden chamber, and the smoke does not rush straight up and out as it does in an open hearth, but instead travels through a labyrinth of channels inside the stove's body, transferring its heat to the ceramic mass before finally escaping through the chimney. The tiles grow warm slowly, absorbing the energy of the fire, and then they release that warmth gradually, steadily, for hours after the flames have died. You place your palm against the surface and feel the gentle radiation, persistent and even, nothing like the fierce blast of an open fire that scorches your face while leaving your back cold. The children of the house gather near the stove in the evening, and you join them, sitting on the wooden bench that runs along the wall. They are doing small tasks. The girl is carding wool, pulling the fibers straight with patient strokes, while her brother repairs a harness strap, his young fingers surprisingly deft with the leather and needle. No one speaks of staying warm. Warmth is simply the condition that allows this quiet industry to continue, the invisible foundation upon which the evening rests. You notice how the entire room is organized around the stove. The sleeping alcoves are built into the walls nearest to it, their openings fitted with curtains that can be drawn for privacy and additional insulation. The table where the family eats is positioned to catch the warmth without blocking the heat circulation to the rest of the room. Even the storage chests are placed strategically, creating buffers against the cold outer walls. Nothing is arbitrary. Every object has been positioned through long experience, each placement representing a small optimization in the economy of heat. Later, when the family prepares for sleep, you watch as the mother pulls heated stones from the edge of the stove's firebox, wrapping them carefully in cloth. These stones, smooth river rocks that have been collected and saved for this purpose, have been warming all evening, absorbing heat that will now be transferred to the beds. She places one wrapped stone at the foot of each sleeping alcove, and you feel the warmth through your blankets when you lie down, a concentrated comfort that seems almost magical in its intensity. The stone will stay warm for hours, slowly releasing its stored energy, turning the bed from a cold repository into a warm refuge. You lie in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling around you, the occasional creak of wood contracting in the cold, the muffled stirring of the cattle below, the whisper of wind against the shutters. The warmth from the stone radiates upward, and you think about the chain of transformations that brought this comfort to you, the sun that grew the trees that became wood, the wood that became fire, the fire that heated the stone that now warms your feet. Nothing is wasted. Everything is connected. Morning comes with frost on the inside of the windows, delicate ferns of ice that the children admire before the day's warmth erases them. You rise and help rebuild the fire in the stove, learning the proper sequence: clear the ash, lay the kindling, add the larger pieces, adjust the draft. The woman of the house watches your technique, offering small corrections with gestures rather than words. When the fire catches properly, she nods, and you feel a disproportionate pride in having performed this simple task correctly. You spend the morning helping to gather wood from the covered stack behind the house. The logs are arranged with their cut ends facing out, allowing air to circulate and complete the seasoning process. You learn to identify the driest pieces by their lighter weight, their graying bark, the hollow sound they make when struck together. The man shows you how to split the larger rounds, where to place the wedge, how to read the grain so the wood will cleave cleanly rather than splintering. Your hands grow cold despite your gloves, and you welcome the return to the house, the warmth that greets you like an embrace when you push open the heavy door. The midday meal is prepared on a small iron stove in the corner, separate from the large ceramic one that heats the room. This cooking stove is cast iron, more responsive to immediate need, and you watch as the woman adjusts the fire beneath the pot, adding or removing wood to control the temperature. The soup that emerges, barley and dried vegetables, thickened with a small amount of lard, tastes profoundly good, not because of its ingredients but because of the context, the way warmth and nourishment combine into something larger than their separate elements. After the meal, you follow the old man on his rounds through the village. He carries a small leather satchel of tools, and you understand that he serves as a kind of informal engineer, helping neighbors maintain their stoves and chimneys. At the first house, a young couple complains that their stove is not drawing properly, that smoke backs up into the room. The old man climbs onto the roof, you following carefully behind, and inspects the chimney. He finds a partial blockage, a bird's nest from the previous spring that has worked its way down during autumn winds, and clears it with a long flexible rod. Back inside, the smoke now rises cleanly, and the young wife's face shows relief that borders on joy. A smoking stove can make a room uninhabitable, can drive a family from their home even as they freeze, and you understand that the old man's knowledge is not decorative but essential. At another house, an elderly widow worries that her ceramic stove has developed a crack. The old man examines it closely, running his fingers over the surface, checking the joints between tiles. He finds a hairline fracture, barely visible, but pronounces it superficial, not yet a threat, but something to watch. He mixes a paste from ash and clay and carefully works it into the crack, sealing it. The widow offers cheese in payment, which he accepts with a small bow. This is how knowledge circulates in the village, through reciprocal exchange, through the network of obligation and assistance that binds everyone together more securely than any written contract. You return home as the afternoon light begins to fade, the short winter day already surrendering to evening. The temperature has dropped further, and you can feel the cold trying to press through your layers of wool. Inside, the stove's warmth is like a physical presence, something you move into rather than just experience. You help the woman prepare the evening meal, peeling turnips that have been stored in the root cellar, their flesh still firm despite months underground. She teaches you the patience required in this work, the way each task must be completed thoroughly because there is no surplus, no margin for waste. The evening unfolds according to the same quiet pattern as the night before, but you notice more details now, the way the father banks the fire before bed, covering the coals with ash to slow their consumption, ensuring that some heat will remain until morning. The way the mother checks each child, touching their hands and feet to verify they are warm enough. The way the family moves together through the rituals of preparation for sleep, each person knowing their role, performing it without discussion or debate. You wake in the deepest part of the night and lie still, listening. The stone at your feet has cooled, but the bed itself has retained warmth, your own heat trapped by the heavy quilts, held close by the curtains that enclose the sleeping alcove. You can hear, very faintly, the breathing of the cattle below, and it occurs to you that you are sleeping quite literally on top of other sleeping creatures, that the boundary between human and animal space is just a few planks of wood, that the warmth you feel is as much theirs as yours. The thought is strange but not uncomfortable. It seems right, somehow, that survival should be collaborative, that the mountain winter should be met not with individual defiance but with collective strategy. In the morning, you join the old man again, this time to visit a house at the edge of the village where a young man is building an addition to accommodate his growing family. The new room is already framed, but the crucial question is how to extend the heating system. The old man examines the existing stove and considers the possibilities. He sketches in the snow with a stick, showing how the chimney could be modified, how a second stove could be added in the new room, sharing the same flue but with its own firebox. The young man listens intently, and you see the same expression on his face that you have felt on your own, the recognition that warmth is not simply a matter of burning wood, but of understanding flow and retention, of channeling energy rather than merely releasing it. The old man explains that the new stove should be positioned so its warmth reaches the sleeping area where the children will be, that the prevailing drafts in the room must be considered, that the quality of the chimney draw will affect how much fuel is needed. He speaks of these things with the same seriousness that a lowland architect might discuss load-bearing walls or foundation depth, and you understand that in this place, thermal engineering is not a specialty but a universal literacy, something everyone must learn because everyone's life depends on it. Over the following days, you begin to perceive the village not as a collection of separate houses but as a network of heat management strategies, each household a variation on the same fundamental theme. Some families favor larger ceramic stoves that burn less frequently but retain heat longer. Others use smaller stoves that require more frequent feeding but offer more immediate warmth. Some houses have multiple stoves, zones of warmth separated by cooler transitional spaces. Others concentrate all their heat in a single room where the family gathers, allowing the peripheral rooms to remain cold, using them only for storage. You visit a household where the stove is built into the wall itself, sharing its back surface with the kitchen on the other side, so that a single fire serves 2 rooms. You see another house where the sleeping alcoves are built directly against the stove's back wall, creating a shared thermal mass that radiates warmth all night. Each solution is ingenious in its own way, each represents generations of observation and refinement, and you begin to understand that what you are witnessing is not primitive simplicity but sophisticated adaptation, technology that has evolved not through written theory but through lived experiment, success and failure measured in survival. The old man takes you to see one of the oldest houses in the village, where the current occupants are descendants of the family that built it 200 years before. The stove here is a massive construction, built by a master craftsman whose name is still remembered, its tiles decorated with elaborate scenes of harvest and hunting. The old man explains that such stoves were often built by itinerant specialists who traveled from valley to valley, bringing with them knowledge of the best clays, the optimal designs for heat channels, the glazing techniques that would make the tiles both beautiful and durable. These craftsmen were highly valued, he says, their services traded for lodging, food, and whatever wealth a mountain household could offer. You stand before the ancient stove and place your hand on its surface, feeling the warmth that has been renewed daily for 2 centuries, imagining the generations of hands that have fed it, the countless mornings when someone stood in this exact spot and opened the firebox door, adding wood to coax the fire back to life. The continuity is almost overwhelming, the sense that you are performing an action that links you directly to people who lived and died before your grandparents were born, that the warmth you feel is the same warmth they felt, generated by the same process, sustained by the same patience and care. The old woman who lives in this house offers you tea, and you sit at her table while she talks about the stove as if it were a family member. She knows its moods, she says, knows when it is drawing well and when the weather is affecting the draft, knows exactly how much wood it needs to maintain an even temperature through the night. Her grandchildren play near it, building small structures from wooden blocks, and she watches them with an expression that contains both affection and a deeper satisfaction, the knowledge that they are growing up with the same warmth she knew, that they will carry this experience forward into their own families. Later, you help the old man clean his own chimney, a task that must be performed regularly to prevent dangerous buildup of creosote and soot. You climb to the roof again, less nervous now than the first time, and help lower the weighted brush down the flue. The old man works from inside, collecting the soot that falls, and when you come back down you see the pile of dark powder he has swept into a bucket. He explains that this will be mixed with lye to make soap, that nothing is truly waste in the mountain economy, that even the residue of burning has its use. You spend an afternoon learning to identify different types of wood by their burning characteristics. The old man splits samples of spruce, larch, pine, and the occasional hardwood that has been carried up from lower elevations. He shows you how each wood burns differently, spruce with quick heat and lively flames, good for morning fires when you want rapid warmth, larch with steady, longer-lasting coals, ideal for overnight burning, pine with its resinous intensity, helpful when the fire needs reviving but requiring careful attention to prevent creosote buildup. He explains that the best approach is to mix the woods, using the qualities of each to create a fire that serves the household's varying needs throughout the day. The knowledge feels endless, each day revealing new layers of understanding. You learn about the draft vents that must be adjusted according to wind direction, about the particular angle at which wood should be stacked in the firebox to promote complete combustion, about the signs that indicate when a chimney needs sweeping or when a stove's internal baffles might need repair. You learn to read smoke, the light gray that indicates clean burning, the darker smoke that suggests insufficient air or wet wood, the lazy smoke that means the fire is dying and needs attention. You begin to notice patterns in the village's daily rhythm, the way smoke rises from chimneys at similar times as families wake and prepare meals, the lull during midday when the ceramic stoves are simply radiating stored heat, the increase again in evening as fires are built up for the night. The smoke itself becomes a language. You can tell which houses have fresh wood on the fire, which are coasting on banked coals, which are struggling with damp fuel or poor draft. One evening, a sudden storm arrives, wind driving snow horizontally across the mountainside. The family gathers close to the stove, and you feel the house shudder slightly under the wind's assault. But inside, the warmth holds. The thick walls, the small windows, the careful construction that allows no unnecessary drafts, all of it works together to maintain the habitable space. You think of travelers caught in such weather, of the deadly cold that waits just outside the door, and you feel a renewed appreciation for the barrier of warmth that human ingenuity has created here. The storm continues through the night, and in the morning the world is transformed. Snow has drifted against the buildings, creating new shapes and contours. The men of the village work together to clear paths, and you join them, wielding a wooden shovel, feeling your body heat up with the exertion even as your face numbs in the cold air. When you return inside, the contrast is almost shocking. The warmth seems more intense, more precious, after the battle with the storm. The woman of the house prepares a special meal to celebrate the storm's passing, and you realize that the rhythm of life here is punctuated by these events. The storm survived, the wood supply checked and found adequate, the chimneys still drawing properly, the animals healthy below. Each small confirmation that the systems are working, that the winter can be endured, becomes a reason for quiet celebration. You help the old man make repairs to a neighbor's stove where one of the tiles has cracked beyond the simple remedy of ash paste. He has brought a replacement tile, salvaged from a house that burned years ago, and you watch as he carefully removes the damaged piece, cleans the surface, and sets the new tile in place with mortar mixed from specific clays he has stored for this purpose. The work is meticulous, and he explains that a poorly set tile can compromise the entire stove, creating gaps where heat escapes or smoke leaks into the room. When he finishes, the repair is nearly invisible, and you understand that this, too, is part of the web of knowledge that keeps the village alive, the ability to maintain and repair the infrastructure of warmth. As the days pass, you begin to internalize the rhythms, to anticipate the tasks before you are asked, to read the subtle signs that indicate what needs doing. You find yourself checking the wood supply without being prompted, noting which pieces are driest and should be used next. You learn to feed the fire at the right moment, not too early when heat would be wasted, not too late when the temperature would drop. You become part of the household's thermal management, another set of hands and eyes contributing to the collective effort. The old man seems to recognize your growing competence, and one morning he invites you to accompany him on a longer journey, to a neighboring valley where a family has requested his help with a stove that has never worked properly since it was built. You welcome the opportunity, not just to see more of the mountains but to witness the old man's expertise applied to a more complex problem. The journey takes most of the morning, following a path that switchbacks up and over a high ridge before descending into the next valley. The cold is intense at the ridge top, wind cutting through your layers of wool, but the physical exertion of climbing keeps you warm enough. You marvel at the old man's stamina. He moves steadily, not fast but without stopping, his breathing controlled, his steps sure even on the icy path. The house in the neighboring valley is newer than most, built within the last decade, and you can see immediately that something is wrong with its stove. Smoke hangs in the main room despite the windows being sealed, and the family describes how the fire never draws properly, how they must burn twice as much wood as their neighbors to achieve half the warmth. The old man begins his examination methodically, checking first the chimney, then the stove's exterior, then asking permission to look inside the firebox while the fire is out. He finds the problem in the internal channels. The builder, not understanding the principles properly, has created passages that are too narrow and turn too sharply, restricting the smoke's flow and causing it to back up. The old man shakes his head, not in judgment but in regret that such an error was made. He explains to the young father that fixing it will require partially disassembling the stove, rebuilding the channels correctly, and reassembling everything, a major undertaking in the middle of winter. The family's distress is visible, and you see the calculation in their faces. How will they stay warm while the work is being done? Can they afford to have the stove out of service even for a few days? Is there enough wood to compensate for the inefficiency until spring? The old man considers, then proposes a solution. They will bring a smaller, temporary stove from the village, set it up to provide basic heat, and then work as quickly as possible to repair the main stove. He will recruit help, he says, and if everyone works together, the job might be completed in 3 days. You return to your village and watch as the old man organizes the effort. He speaks to the men who have skills in masonry and ceramic work, explains what is needed, and within a day a plan has formed. The temporary stove is loaded onto a sledge, along with tools and materials, and a group of 5 men, including you, set out for the neighboring valley. You pull the sledge in shifts, the runners sliding over the packed snow, and arrive by evening. The work begins the next morning, and you find yourself part of a coordinated effort that moves with surprising efficiency. 2 men carefully dismantle the upper portion of the stove, removing tiles and setting them aside in sequence so they can be reassembled correctly. The old man and another craftsman reshape the internal channels, using additional clay and fire bricks to create proper dimensions and angles. You help by mixing mortar, carrying materials, cleaning tools, learning through observation as the stove is essentially rebuilt from the inside. The family keeps the temporary stove burning, maintaining just enough warmth to make the work possible, and at night everyone sleeps in the same room, close to the small heat source, blankets shared and redistributed. You experience directly what it means when the primary heat source fails, how quickly comfort can become precariousness, and you understand why the old man's knowledge is valued as highly as any material wealth. By the 3rd day, the stove is reassembled, the tiles reset, the mortar drying. The old man will not allow a fire to be lit yet. The repairs need time to cure, but he has brought heated stones from the temporary stove, and these are placed inside the firebox to help the drying process without the stress of full heat. The family must wait 1 more day, but you can see the relief in their faces, the knowledge that soon their home will function as it should. On the 4th day, the old man judges the repairs ready. He builds the first fire himself, starting small, gradually increasing the size, watching the smoke flow, listening to the draw, feeling the heat begin to radiate from the ceramic mass. The fire burns cleanly, the smoke rises properly, and within an hour the room is warmer than anyone has felt it since the stove was first built. The young mother begins to cry, not from sadness but from relief, and the old man accepts her gratitude with a simple nod, as if he has done nothing more than what any neighbor would do. You help carry the temporary stove back to the village, your muscles aching from days of labor, but feeling something beyond physical fatigue, a sense of purpose, of having contributed to something meaningful. The old man walks beside you, and at one point he speaks, his words measured and deliberate. He says that warmth is not something you can take for granted in the mountains, that every generation must learn and pass on the knowledge, that the skills he has shown you are not his alone but belong to everyone who has lived and worked in these valleys. He says that you are learning well, that you understand not just the techniques but the spirit behind them, the collaboration, the attention, the refusal to accept failure when lives depend on success. Back in the village, life continues its quiet rhythm, but you move through it now with different eyes. You see the stoves not as simple objects but as the crystallization of centuries of thought and experiment. You see the wood stacks not as piles of fuel but as carefully managed resources, the result of summer labor made available in winter need. You see the entire village as a system of warmth generation and preservation, every element connected, every household both independent and part of the larger whole. The winter deepens, and you settle into the patterns you have learned, tending fires, feeding animals, maintaining the infrastructure of survival. The work is never finished, but it is also never overwhelming. The daily tasks are manageable, made easier by their very repetition, by the comfort of knowing exactly what needs doing and how to do it. You find a kind of peace in this routine, a meditation in the simple acts of splitting wood, banking coals, checking drafts, feeling for warmth. You stand at the threshold of deep winter now, that long season when the work of autumn reveals its worth or its failures, when the wood stacked beneath the eaves and the hay pressed into the loft and the smoke rising from the chimney become the only thing standing between your household and the mountains' indifferent cold. The snow has come in earnest. Not the light dustings of November, playful and temporary, but the true snow of January, the snow that arrives in the night and remains until April, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and merciless. You wake one morning to find the world remade, the familiar paths and boundaries erased beneath a blanket that reaches past your knees in the sheltered places and past your waist where the wind has sculpted drifts against the barn wall and the woodshed. The mountains that encircle the valley have withdrawn behind veils of white and gray, their peaks invisible, their presence felt only in the way the wind funnels down their slopes and seeks every gap in your walls, every crack around your windows, every vulnerable seam in the fabric of your home. This is when the stew becomes the center of all life, the warm heart around which everything else orbits. The rest of the house grows cold now, deliberately so. You close the doors to the other rooms, the bedrooms upstairs and the storage spaces and the summer kitchen that served you well in the warm months but cannot be heated now without consuming what you cannot spare. You hang blankets over doorways to create additional barriers, wool and linen curtains that trap precious warmth where it matters most. The household contracts, drawing inward, and the single heated room becomes kitchen and workshop and gathering place and living space for the duration of the deep cold. You move through these winter days with an awareness that sharpens as the temperature drops. Every action carries weight. Every opening of the door to fetch more wood from the covered pile outside, every moment when cold air rushes in and the flames in the stove lean and flicker, every split log placed on the fire, all of it is part of a careful calculation that you perform almost without thinking now, a mental arithmetic learned from childhood and refined through years of winter survived. The ceramic stove in the corner radiates its steady heat, the tiles warm to the touch, holding and releasing the warmth of the morning's fire throughout the day and into the evening. You tend it with the rhythm you've established, adding wood in measured amounts, adjusting the draft to control the burn, sweeping the ash from the firebox before it accumulates enough to choke the flames. The stove's mass is both blessing and challenge. It takes time to warm fully, requires patience and foresight, but once heated it provides a constancy that a simple fireplace never could. The room settles into a temperature that hovers somewhere between truly warm and merely adequate, a climate that allows you to work without heavy outer layers but reminds you always that beyond these walls the cold waits, patient and absolute. Your grandmother sits in her chair near the stove, the spot she's claimed as her own, where the warmth reaches her aging bones most directly. Her hands move constantly, knitting or spinning or mending, never idle even as she speaks, telling stories or offering observations or simply humming old songs beneath her breath. She wears layers like everyone else in the household, the wool stockings and the skirt and the bodice and the shawl that never leaves her shoulders, but her proximity to the stove allows her to work in relative comfort, her fingers nimble despite the cold that settles into joints and makes movement painful for those her age. Your father occupies the table for much of the day, working on the small repairs and projects that fill the winter hours. He's carving new wooden spoons to replace ones that have cracked or worn too thin, shaping them from blocks of maple with patient strokes of his knife, the curls of pale wood falling to the floor where they'll be swept up later and added to the kindling box. Nothing is wasted. Every scrap of wood, every fragment and sliver, finds its use. The shavings from his carving will help start tomorrow's fire. The sawdust from cutting boards will be mixed with scraps and molded into bricks that burn slowly and extend the wood supply. Even the bark stripped from logs before splitting is saved and dried and used as tinder or as filler in the longest, coldest nights when the fire needs to be sustained but wood must be conserved. Your mother moves between the table and the stove, preparing the day's meals with the economy of motion that comes from working in a space where every gesture has been performed thousands of times before. The cooking happens directly on the stove's surface now, on the flat top that serves as both heating element and workspace. She sets the pot of water to heat for the porridge, the heavy pot that will simmer there for the better part of an hour, filling the room with the scent of oats and milk and the small bit of honey saved for sweetness. Later there will be soup, always soup, the reliable meal that stretches ingredients and provides warmth from the inside as the stove provides it from without. Root vegetables stored in the cellar, dried beans soaked overnight, perhaps a bit of salted pork if the supply allows, all of it simmering together into something sustaining and warm. The children, Your siblings and cousins who share this household through the winter occupy the spaces around the edges, playing quiet games on the floor or helping with small tasks appropriate to their size and skill. The youngest might be sorting dried beans, separating varieties into different bowls with careful concentration. An older child helps with the spinning, carding wool into fluffy clouds that will be spun into thread. Another practices letters on a small slate, forming words with painstaking slowness, education continuing even in the heart of winter, even when the schoolhouse is closed and the teacher snowed into his own home 2 valleys over. You move through the room, tending to your own responsibilities, the endless small tasks that keep a household functioning. You check the draft on the stove, adjusting the small metal door that controls the flow of air into the firebox, ensuring the burn remains steady and efficient. Too much air and the fire roars, consuming wood too quickly, creating heat that rises straight up the chimney and is lost. Too little and the fire smolders, producing smoke that backs into the room, making eyes water and lungs ache. You've learned to read the signs, the color of the flames, the sound of the fire, the feel of the air around the stove, and adjust accordingly without conscious thought, the knowledge living in your hands and your instincts. Outside, beyond the thick walls and the small windows, the day progresses through shades of gray and white. Snow falls intermittently, adding to the accumulated depth, and the wind rises and falls in cycles that whistle around the corners of the house and moan in the chimney. You're aware of it always, that presence of cold and weather, but it remains at a remove, kept at bay by the structure you inhabit and the fire you tend. The afternoon brings a visitor, a neighbor from the next farmstead, arriving with snow clinging to his coat and his breath clouding in the cold air that enters with him before the door can be closed and latched again. He stamps his feet on the mat, shaking off snow, and moves immediately toward the stove, hands extended toward its warmth. Your father rises to greet him, and your mother already reaches for another bowl, the automatic hospitality that requires no discussion. A visitor in winter is always offered food and warmth, always invited to sit and rest, because anyone who has ventured out into the cold has done so from necessity and deserves the comfort of a heated room and a hot meal. The 2 men settle at the table, speaking in low voices about the matters that concern them, the depth of the snow and how the animals are faring and whether the pass to the lower valleys might be clear enough for travel in the coming weeks or whether it will remain closed until spring. They discuss wood supplies and hay stores, comparing notes without boasting or complaint, simply sharing information that might prove useful. There's a communality to winter survival in these mountains, a recognition that isolation is dangerous and that maintaining connections, even difficult ones across deep snow, serves everyone's interest. The visitor stays for an hour, perhaps slightly more, warming himself thoroughly before venturing back out into the cold. When he leaves, another gust of freezing air enters briefly, the fire in the stove dips and then recovers, and the household settles back into its rhythm, the temporary break in routine absorbed and integrated. Evening comes early at this time of year, the short winter days surrendering to darkness by mid-afternoon. You light the lamps with care, the tallow candles that provide illumination but must be used sparingly because the fat they're made from could also be used for cooking or for making soap or for waterproofing leather. Light is precious in winter, rationed like everything else, and much of the evening passes in dimness that is not quite dark, the glow from the stove providing enough light for simple tasks while the candles are saved for work that requires clearer vision. The family gathers as the temperature outside drops further with the loss of what little solar warmth penetrated the clouds during the day. You can feel it, that deepening cold, even inside the protected room, a subtle change in the quality of the air near the walls, a reminder that the night is a different beast than the day and requires different measures. Your father adds wood to the stove, building the fire higher than the daytime burn, ensuring there will be enough heat stored in the ceramic mass to carry through until morning. The stove will be fed once more before sleep, a final loading of logs that will burn down slowly through the night, and then once again when the first person rises in the darkness before dawn, rekindling the fire for another day. Dinner is served and consumed in the companionable near silence of tired people eating together, the sounds of spoons against bowls and bread being torn and shared, quiet murmurs requesting salt or more soup. The meal is simple but adequate, filling stomachs and providing the fuel your bodies need to maintain warmth through the night ahead. After eating, the children are sent to prepare for bed, and you help the youngest, guiding them through the cold journey up the stairs to the sleeping room where their breath will cloud and frost will form on the inside of the windows, and the only warmth will be what they carry with them and create through proximity. The beds have been prepared for winter with the care they require. Multiple layers of blankets, wool and linen piled thick, create nests of relative warmth. Beneath the blankets, warming stones have been placed earlier in the evening, smooth river rocks heated in the oven of the stove and wrapped in cloth, radiating heat into the bedding. The children burrow into these prepared spaces quickly, still wearing their undergarments and wool socks, covering themselves completely and holding still, allowing their body heat to warm the trapped air around them. The initial cold of the sheets makes them gasp and giggle nervously, but within minutes the cocoon of blankets becomes bearable, even comfortable, a small warm space in the greater cold. You return downstairs to find the adults preparing for their own rest. The stove is loaded one final time, the firebox packed with logs selected for their size and density, wood that will burn slowly and steadily through the dark hours. Your father adjusts the draft to its nighttime setting, restricting the air flow to slow the combustion, and checks that the stove door is latched securely. Your mother banks the coals, arranging them carefully to ensure even burning, and sweeps the hearth one last time, that automatic tidying that marks the end of the working day. Your grandmother is the first to retire, shuffling to her small room just off the main living space, the only bedroom on the ground floor and the warmest sleeping space in the house because it shares a wall with the stove. Even so, she wraps herself in additional shawls before lying down, and a heated stone waits in her bed as well, insurance against the cold that creeps into aging bodies with particular cruelty. You help your mother cover the windows with additional insulation for the night, heavy fabric panels that hang inside the shutters, creating dead air space that reduces heat loss through the glass. She moves through the room, checking that doors are closed and draft barriers are in place, the practiced routine of someone who has managed a household through many winters and takes no chances with warmth or safety. When you finally climb the stairs to your own bed, you do so quickly, reluctant to leave the warmth of the stove for longer than necessary. The sleeping room is cold, deeply cold, your breath visible in the faint light that reaches from below. You undress minimally, removing only outer layers, and slide beneath the blankets swiftly, pulling them up to your chin and holding very still while the warmth begins to accumulate. The heated stone at the foot of the bed is a blessing, and you press your cold feet against its cloth-wrapped surface, feeling the heat seep into your skin. Around you, in other beds, your siblings breathe quietly, already asleep or close to it. The house settles, wood contracting in the cold, making small sounds that you know and expect. Below, the stove radiates its captured warmth into the room where your parents still sit for a few more minutes, finishing the small tasks that fill the edges of the day, enjoying the quiet before their own rest begins. You lie in the darkness, cocooned in wool and linen, and think about the fire below, the carefully tended flames that stand between your household and the cold. You think about the wood stacked outside, the reserve that must last until spring, and about the knowledge that fills your mind, how to split and stack, how to judge moisture and select species, how to tend a fire for maximum efficiency, how to read smoke and flame and draft, how to preserve warmth and minimize waste. This knowledge is your inheritance, passed down through generations, earned through cold winters and hard lessons, refined by necessity and maintained through practice. Sleep comes gradually, your body relaxing into the slowly warming nest of blankets, the cold retreating to the edges of awareness. You drift between waking and sleeping, conscious of the sounds of the house, the wind outside, the faint crackle of the fire below, the breathing of your siblings, the settling of timbers. These sounds are comfort, the familiar music of home and safety, of a household functioning as it should, surviving the winter through preparation and knowledge and constant vigilance. Morning arrives in darkness. You wake to the sound of your father's footsteps on the stairs, his passage down to the stoop to revive the fire. The cold has intensified during the night, and you can feel it in the air of the sleeping room, a sharp clarity that makes the blankets precious and the thought of leaving them almost unbearable. But the day's work calls, and you know that the sooner you rise and dress and descend to the warmth below, the sooner your body will stop complaining about the cold. You force yourself out of the bed, the shock of cold air against your skin immediate and bracing. You dress quickly, pulling on layers with fumbling fingers, and make your way downstairs, drawn by the promise of warmth and the smell of wood smoke and the first stirrings of breakfast. The stube is dim but warming rapidly. Your father has the stove open, adding kindling to the banked coals, coaxing flame from the night's slow burn. The fire catches and grows, and he adds larger pieces carefully, building the burn back to its daytime intensity. The room's temperature rises degree by degree, not quickly but steadily, the ceramic mass of the stove absorbing heat and beginning to radiate it outward once again. You take your place in the morning routine, fetching water from the bucket kept inside to prevent freezing, helping your mother begin the preparations for breakfast. The porridge starts cooking, the pot settling onto the stove's surface with a familiar sound. Steam begins to rise as the water heats, and the smell of oats fills the room, mingling with the wood smoke and the faint mustiness of a closed space inhabited through a long winter. One by one, the other members of the household appear, emerging from the cold sleeping spaces to cluster around the stove, hands extended toward its warmth, faces still puffy with sleep but gradually becoming alert as the heat and the morning routine bring them fully awake. Your grandmother is last, moving slowly, stiff from the night's immobility, but she reaches her chair and settles into it with a small sigh of satisfaction, reclaiming her spot near the warmth. The day unfolds as days do in deep winter, slowly, measured, with attention to the necessities that cannot be ignored even in the coldest weather. The animals in the barn must be tended, fed and watered, their own survival dependent on your care. Your father and your older brother dress in their heaviest clothing, wrapping themselves in wool and leather, and venture out into the bitter morning, crossing the short distance from house to barn through snow that squeaks under their boots in a way that signals intense cold, temperatures well below freezing, dangerous cold that can harm exposed skin within minutes. They return as quickly as they can, their faces red and their clothing dusted with snow, and they shed the outer layers with relief, crowding back toward the stove to thaw hands and feet that have gone numb despite gloves and heavy socks. Your mother has hot tea waiting, the weak herbal brew that serves as their morning warming, and they cup the bowls in their hands, letting the heat seep into their fingers while the tea's warmth spreads through their bodies from within. This is the pattern now, this careful cycling between necessary exposure to the cold and return to warmth, this constant balancing of what must be done outside against the cost in firewood and body heat and risk. You learn to make these calculations instinctively, to plan your movements to minimize the time spent in the cold, to group tasks that take you outside so that you make one trip rather than several, to dress appropriately for the temperature and the duration of exposure. The weeks pass in this rhythm. There are days when the cold eases slightly, when the sun appears and the temperature climbs to merely cold rather than bitter, and on these days the household expands slightly, opening shutters to let in light, venturing outside to clear paths or check on stores or simply to break the monotony of indoor confinement. There are other days when storms close in and the world beyond the windows becomes a white chaos of wind and blowing snow, when the cold deepens to dangerous levels and all activity ceases except for the essential, tending the fire, preparing food, maintaining the minimal warmth that keeps the household alive. Through it all, the stove remains the center, the constant. You tend it every day, multiple times each day, feeding it carefully, adjusting its draft, cleaning its ash, monitoring its performance. You've come to know this particular stove intimately, its quirks and preferences, the way it draws in certain wind conditions, the spots on its surface that heat most intensely, the rhythm of its heat retention. This knowledge is practical and immediate, but it's also something deeper, a relationship forged through dependence and attention, through the recognition that your survival and this apparatus are fundamentally linked through the long months of winter. Your grandmother speaks sometimes of winters past, of years when the snow came early and stayed late, of cold snaps that froze wells solid and split trees with sounds like cannon fire, of households that ran short of food or fuel and had to make desperate choices. She tells these stories not to frighten but to teach, to pass on the memory of what winter can be and what it requires, to ensure that the respect for the season and its dangers remains alive in the younger generation. You listen, and you remember, adding her stories to your own growing understanding of this place and its demands. You're learning what your parents know and what their parents knew before them, accumulating the practical wisdom that means survival in an environment that tolerates no carelessness and forgives no significant mistakes. You're learning to read the weather and the wood supply, to judge what's enough and what's cutting it too close, to plan for contingencies and worst cases while hoping for moderate conditions and adequate resources. One evening, as the household gathers for dinner, your father announces that he'll make a trip to the village in 2 days' time if the weather holds. Supplies are running low, not critically, but low enough to warrant the journey while it can still be made safely. He'll take the small sledge and go on foot, following the path that he and the other men have maintained through the snow, packed down by repeated passage into something passable. He'll trade for the things the household cannot produce, salt and a bit of grain, perhaps some tallow, maybe news from the lower valleys if anyone has managed to come through. The next 2 days are spent in preparation. Your mother makes a list of what's needed, checking stores and making careful calculations about what can be stretched and what must be replenished. Your father gathers the items he'll trade, handwork from the winter months, carved spoons and woven baskets and knitted items, the products of household labor that have value to others and can be exchanged for necessities. He prepares the sledge, checking the runners and the lashings, ensuring everything is secure for the journey. The morning of his departure dawns clear and cold, the kind of cold that makes the snow glitter like crushed glass and the distant peaks stand out sharp against a sky of intense blue. Your father dresses in layers, wool and leather, and over it all a heavy coat that has served him for 20 winters, patched and repaired but still serviceable. He wraps a scarf around his face, covering his nose and mouth against the worst of the cold, and pulls a woolen cap down over his ears. The family gathers to see him off, to wish him safe travel and a successful journey. Your mother hands him a package of food for the way, bread and cheese wrapped carefully. Your grandmother reminds him to give her greetings to certain people in the village, old friends she hasn't seen since autumn. The children cluster around, excited by the novelty of his departure, the break in the routine that his absence will create. And then he's gone, trudging out into the brilliant cold morning, the sledge trailing behind him, growing smaller as he follows the packed path down toward the valley floor and the village that lies there. You watch from the window until he disappears from sight, and then you turn back to the warmth of the stube and the day's work that continues regardless of who is present or absent. The house feels different without him, slightly emptier, the patterns of interaction shifting to accommodate the gap. Your mother takes on his tasks in addition to her own, and you step into some of hers, the household reorganizing itself smoothly as it has done many times before when circumstances required adaptation. The stove still needs tending, the animals still need care, the meals still need preparation. Life continues, measured and steady, while outside the cold holds the landscape in its grip and the smoke from your chimney rises straight into the still air, a signal to anyone watching that within these walls a fire burns and a household endures. You wake before dawn on a morning in early March, and the quality of the cold has changed. It is still sharp, still insistent, but somewhere beneath it you sense the first tremor of thaw, the distant promise that winter will not last forever. You lie still for a moment in your bed, listening to the silence of the house around you, and you realize that the fire in the stove has burned down to embers during the night. The room is cool but not unbearable. Your body has learned, over these long months, to hold its own heat more efficiently, to wake slowly, to move with intention rather than haste. You rise and pull the woolen blanket around your shoulders, padding across the wooden floor in your thick socks. The boards are cold beneath your feet but no longer painful. You have come to know every creak and settle of this house, every draft that slips through the joins, every corner where warmth pools or cold descends. This knowledge is not intellectual but physical, written into your muscles and breath, a vocabulary of survival that speaks without words. The main room is dim, lit only by the faint gray glow that seeps through the shutters. You move to the stove and open the iron door, peering inside at the nest of ash and fading coals. A few embers still glow deep orange at the center, and you feel a quiet satisfaction at the sight. You have learned to bank the fire properly, to cover the coals with just enough ash to slow their consumption without smothering them entirely. It is a skill that takes seasons to master, a conversation between wood and air and time. You kneel and begin the morning ritual. First, you clear away the loose ash with the small iron shovel, depositing it into the ash bucket that sits beside the stove. The ash is still warm, and even this small heat feels precious in the cool air. You will carry it outside later, adding it to the pile near the garden plot where it will wait to be spread across the soil when the ground softens. Nothing is wasted here. Even the residue of fire has purpose, returns to the cycle, feeds the earth that feeds the trees that feed the flames. Next, you add small twigs to the embers, placing them carefully so that air can circulate beneath and around them. You have gathered these twigs over weeks, selecting pieces that are dry and thin, storing them in a basket near the stove where they remain crisp and ready. You watch as the first wisps of smoke begin to curl upward, and then, after a long breath, the smallest tongue of flame licks along the underside of a twig. The fire is waking. You add slightly larger pieces now, building a structure that allows the flames to climb, to find oxygen, to grow from a fragile flicker into something more substantial. This is meditative work, requiring attention but not urgency, and you find yourself sinking into the rhythm of it, the small adjustments, the patient waiting. Outside, you hear the first bird call of the morning, a thin note that pierces the stillness, and you imagine other households across the valley performing this same ritual, this daily resurrection of warmth from the ashes of the night. When the fire is established, crackling softly and beginning to throw real heat, you close the stove door and adjust the air vents, controlling the draft to keep the burn steady but not wasteful. You will add larger logs soon, but for now this is enough. You stand and stretch, feeling the stiffness in your back and shoulders, the residue of months spent hauling wood and water, bending to tend fires, moving through cold rooms and icy paths. You pull the shutters open, and pale light floods the room. The mountains across the valley are still deep in shadow, their upper slopes touched with the faintest blush of pink as the sun climbs somewhere beyond the eastern ridge. The sky is clear, a rare gift after weeks of low cloud and intermittent snow. You can see smoke rising from chimneys throughout the village, thin gray lines that ascend and disperse in the still air. Each thread of smoke represents a family, a household, a small circle of warmth carved from the cold. Your grandmother is already awake. You hear her moving in her room, the soft shuffle of her feet, the creak of her door opening. She emerges wrapped in her heavy shawl, her hair braided and pinned, her face composed in the quiet dignity she carries even in the earliest hours. She nods to you and moves to the stove, holding her hands out to absorb the growing heat. She does not speak, and you do not expect her to. The morning is too new for words, too fragile to break with unnecessary sound. Together, you prepare the morning meal. She fills the kettle with water from the bucket near the door, hanging it on the hook above the stove. You slice bread from the dark loaf baked 2 days ago, setting the slices on the iron plate that rests on the stove's surface. The bread begins to toast, filling the room with a warm, yeasty scent. Your grandmother brings out a small crock of butter and a jar of preserves made last summer from wild berries gathered on the slopes above the village. These simple foods, prepared and stored with care, sustained by the warmth of the stove, form the foundation of survival here. As the kettle begins to hiss and steam, your father enters from outside, stamping snow from his boots. His cheeks are red from the cold, his breath visible in the doorway before the heat of the room dissolves it. He has been to the barn to check the animals, to ensure they made it through the night without incident. He reports that all is well, the goats are restless and eager for spring, the chickens are beginning to lay more frequently, the ox is calm and chewing its cud. These animals, like the humans they share the valley with, have endured the winter through careful stewardship and the indirect gift of fire. The barn is warmer than the open air, insulated by stone and thatch and the body heat of the creatures within, but it is the warmth radiating from the house, the smoke and heat that signify life and vigilance, that marks this place as inhabited, protected, intentional. You eat together in comfortable silence, the toasted bread spread thick with butter and preserves, the herbal tea poured from the kettle into ceramic cups that warm your hands. The food is simple but deeply satisfying, each bite a confirmation that you have survived another night, that the stores have held, that the fire has not gone out. You taste the summer and the preserves, the long bright days when warmth was abundant and free, and you hold that memory like a talisman against the lingering cold. After the meal, your father speaks of the work that needs to be done. The woodpile is still adequate but will need replenishing before next winter. There are repairs to be made to the barn roof, which suffered damage during a heavy snowfall in January. There are tools to be sharpened, fences to be mended, and, most urgently, preparations to be made for the planting season that will arrive in only a few weeks. Spring in the mountains is brief and unforgiving, the window for planting is narrow, and those who wait too long find themselves hungry the following winter. Your grandmother adds that the spinning and weaving must continue. There is wool yet to be carded and spun, and she has promised several skeins to a family in the lower village in exchange for a sack of flour. This economy of barter and mutual dependence is the lifeblood of the community. No household is entirely self-sufficient, each relies on the skills and resources of others, and the warmth of the fire makes this exchange possible. Without the ability to heat homes and workspaces, the long tasks of winter, spinning, weaving, carving, repairing, would be impossible. Cold hands cannot card wool or whittle wood. Cold bodies cannot sustain the focus and patience required for such work. As the morning progresses, you move through your tasks with the steady rhythm that has become second nature. You carry the ash bucket outside and add its contents to the pile near the garden. The ash is fine and gray, light as dust, and it disperses slightly in the breeze. You notice that the snow around the house has begun to recede, revealing patches of brown earth and dormant grass. Icicles hang from the eaves, dripping steadily in the strengthening sunlight. The sound of water, absent for so many months, is startling and welcome. You walk to the woodshed and select several logs for the day's burning. You have become adept at choosing wood. You take pieces that are fully seasoned, their ends checked and pale, their weight noticeably lighter than fresh-cut timber. You avoid pieces with visible rot or excessive knots, which burn unevenly and produce less heat. You carry the logs inside and stack them neatly beside the stove, within easy reach. This small preparation, done in the warmth of mid-morning, will save you from venturing into the cold later when the light fades and the temperature drops. Your father spends the morning in the barn, and you join him after your tasks inside are complete. The barn is dim and smells of hay and animal warmth. The goats bleat softly as you enter, their eyes bright and curious. Your father is mucking out the stalls, piling soiled straw onto a wooden sled that will be dragged outside and added to the compost heap. You take up a pitchfork and work alongside him, moving in the familiar choreography of shared labor. He speaks as you work, his voice low and measured. He tells you about winters past, about years when the snow was so deep that the village was cut off for weeks, when families survived on stored grain and dried meat and little else. He tells you about a winter when he was a child, when a fire in a neighboring household went out during the night and the family woke to find their water frozen solid and frost creeping across the inside walls. The neighbors came together, bringing embers from their own stoves, rekindling the dead hearth, sharing blankets and food until the household was stabilized. No one questioned the necessity of this aid. To let a family's fire die was to endanger the entire community, for cold and hunger weaken the fabric that binds people together. He tells you, too, about the old knowledge, the techniques passed down through generations. He speaks of the ancient practice of building homes into the hillsides, using the earth itself as insulation. He describes the careful orientation of houses, positioned to capture the maximum sunlight during the short winter days. He explains the significance of the stube, the single heated room that becomes the center of life, and how the rest of the house is allowed to remain cold, a buffer zone that protects the core warmth from the outer chill. You listen and absorb these stories, understanding that they are more than reminiscences. They are instructions, blueprints for survival, the accumulated wisdom of countless winters. Your father is not simply sharing memories, he is ensuring that the knowledge persists, that you will be able to teach your own children, should you have them, how to live in this place, how to coax warmth from wood and stone, how to read the signs of weather and season, how to maintain the delicate balance between consumption and conservation. By midday, the sun is high and the air inside the barn has warmed slightly. You pause in your work and step outside, blinking in the bright light. The village below is fully awake now, people moving along the narrow paths, smoke rising from every chimney. You see a group of children playing near the frozen stream, their voices high and clear, their laughter carried on the wind. They are bundled in layers of wool and fur, their cheeks red, their movements quick and energetic. They do not yet carry the weight of responsibility that you and your father bear, but they are learning, watching, absorbing the rhythms of this life. You walk down the slope toward the village center, where the small chapel stands, its stone walls dark and solid, its roof covered in snow. The chapel is unheated except during services, and even then the warmth comes only from the bodies of the congregants and a small brazier near the altar. You have attended services throughout the winter, standing in the cold interior, your breath visible, your fingers numb, listening to the priest's words echo off the stone. The chapel is a place of community and continuity, a reminder that life here is not merely a struggle for survival but also a participation in something larger, a tradition that stretches back through centuries. Near the chapel, you encounter an older man, a stonemason named Johann, who has lived in the village all his life. He greets you with a nod and a few words about the weather, remarking that the thaw has come early this year. You fall into conversation, and he begins to tell you about the construction of his own home, which he built with his father 40 years ago. He describes the careful selection of stones, the mixing of mortar, the placement of each block to ensure stability and insulation. He explains how they built the stove from firebrick and clay, designing it to radiate heat long after the fire has died down, and how they connected the flue to run through an interior wall, capturing every possible degree of warmth before the smoke escapes to the outside. He tells you that the design of these stoves is not accidental but the result of generations of experimentation and refinement. In the past, he says, many homes had open hearths, which were inefficient and dangerous, sending most of their heat up and out through the roof. The development of enclosed stoves, with their controlled drafts and thermal mass, revolutionized life in the mountains, making it possible to heat homes more effectively with less wood. This innovation, which spread across the Alps over centuries, represents a profound shift in the relationship between people and their environment, a move from passive endurance to active management of warmth. Johann's words carry the weight of lived experience. He has spent decades tending his fire, learning its moods and requirements, adjusting his practices to match the characteristics of his stove and his fuel. He speaks of wood as if it were a friend, each species known by its personality: the quick, bright burn of pine, the slow, steady heat of oak, the pleasant scent of apple wood, the reluctance of green wood to catch, and the way it hisses and spits as moisture boils out. This intimacy with materials, this deep knowledge of the physical world, is both a necessity and a form of wisdom. It grounds him in reality, connects him to the land and the forest, gives him a sense of agency in a harsh and often unforgiving environment. You thank him for the conversation and continue your walk. You pass the communal mill, silent now in winter, its wheel locked in ice. You pass the blacksmith's forge, where smoke pours from the chimney and the clang of hammer on anvil rings out in steady rhythm. The forge is one of the few places in the village that remains hot throughout the winter, its fire fed not for comfort but for the essential work of shaping metal. Yet even this fire, roaring and intense, is part of the same system, the same reliance on wood and skill and careful management that defines life here. You return home as the afternoon begins to wane, the light growing softer and more golden. Inside, your grandmother has been spinning, the wheel's gentle hum a constant background to the day. She has filled several bobbins with fine thread, the wool transformed from tangled fleece into something ordered and useful. She looks up as you enter and smiles, a rare expression that softens her weathered face. She does not need to say that she is pleased with the day's work, you can see it in her posture, in the quiet satisfaction that radiates from her. You add wood to the stove, building up the fire for the evening. The flames leap and dance, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the walls. You watch them for a long moment, mesmerized by their movement, by the way they seem both alive and ephemeral, both powerful and fragile. Fire is a paradox, It gives life but can also destroy, it warms but can also consume, it is a tool but also a force that must be respected and never taken for granted. Dinner is a more substantial meal than breakfast, a thick soup made from dried beans and a ham bone, flavored with herbs and a bit of garlic. Your mother, who has been working outside for much of the day, tending to tasks in the barn and checking on neighbors, returns and joins you at the table. The soup is rich and warming, each spoonful spreading heat through your chest and limbs. You eat slowly, savoring the flavors, the textures, the simple abundance of having enough. As you eat, your mother tells you about a conversation she had with a woman from the upper village, who reported that several families there are running low on firewood. The winter has been longer than expected, and some households miscalculated their needs. Your father frowns, considering this information. He suggests that the village council should meet to discuss whether wood can be redistributed, whether those with surplus can share with those in need. This is not charity but mutual insurance. Next year, the situation might be reversed, and those who give now may need to receive later. Your grandmother adds that in her youth, it was common for the village to organize communal wood-gathering expeditions in the autumn, with the harvest divided according to family size and need. This practice has fallen away in recent decades, as families have become more independent and self-reliant, but perhaps, she suggests, it is time to revive it. The room falls quiet as her words settle, each of you contemplating the balance between autonomy and cooperation, between the pride of self-sufficiency and the wisdom of mutual support. After dinner, you sit near the stove with a small piece of wood and a carving knife. You have been working for several evenings on a simple spoon, shaping the bowl and handle with slow, deliberate strokes. The work is soothing, requiring concentration but not stress, and the wood smells sweet as the knife peels away thin curls. Your father sits nearby, mending a harness, his large hands surprisingly deft as they work the leather and thread. Your mother and grandmother sit at the table, continuing their spinning and weaving, the rhythmic click and hum of their tools a kind of music. This is the heart of winter life, the long evenings spent indoors, working by firelight, the family gathered in the single warm room, each person engaged in productive labor. There is little leisure as it might be understood in other places and times, but there is a kind of contentment in this busyness, a sense that each small task contributes to the survival and well-being of the whole. The spoon you are carving will be used for years, passed down perhaps to your own children. The harness your father repairs will serve for another season, perhaps longer. The thread your grandmother spins will be woven into cloth that will clothe someone in the village. Nothing is wasted, nothing is trivial. As the evening deepens, the conversation turns to stories. Your grandmother, prompted by a question from your mother, begins to tell a tale she heard from her own grandmother, about a winter so severe that wolves came down from the high peaks and prowled the edges of the village. The villagers kept their fires burning all night, and the light and smoke kept the wolves at bay. She describes how the men took turns standing watch, armed with torches and clubs, and how the women kept kettles of water boiling, ready to throw if the wolves came too close. The winter lasted, she says, until the snow began to melt and the wolves retreated back into the wilderness, hungry but unvictorious. You listen, uncertain how much of the story is literal and how much is embellished or symbolic. It does not matter. The story carries truth of a different kind, the truth that winter is a time of danger, that warmth is a weapon against the cold and the threats it brings, that community and vigilance are necessary for survival. The wolves in the story might be real animals or they might represent something else: hunger, despair, the ever-present possibility of death that hovers at the edges of life in the mountains. Your father tells a story of his own, about a man who lived alone in a cabin high on the slopes, far from the village. The man was a hermit, preferring solitude to society, and he survived many winters by his own skill and resourcefulness. But one winter he fell ill, and his fire went out, and he was found weeks later, frozen in his bed. The village brought his body down and buried him in the spring, and his cabin was dismantled, the wood and stones distributed among the families. Your father's voice is somber as he finishes the tale, and the lesson is clear: isolation is dangerous, self-reliance has limits, and the warmth of community is as vital as the warmth of fire. The fire in the stove has burned down again, and you rise to add more wood. You select 2 medium-sized logs and place them carefully on the coals, watching as they begin to smoke and then ignite. The flames climb and curl, and the room brightens momentarily. You close the stove door and sit back down, returning to your carving. The spoon is nearly finished, its form smooth and balanced in your hand. Your mother begins to hum softly, a melody that you recognize from childhood, a tune that has no words but carries a sense of longing and remembrance. Your grandmother joins in, her voice thin but steady, and the 2 women's voices weave together in simple harmony. Your father listens, his hands still, his eyes distant. You set down your knife and close your eyes, letting the sound wash over you. This, too, is warmth, the warmth of connection, of shared memory, of voices rising together in the fire-lit room. The evening stretches on, measured not by clocks but by the gradual dimming of the light and the slow cooling of the room's edges. Eventually, your grandmother announces that she is tired and retires to her bed. Your mother follows soon after, and your father banks the fire for the night, covering the coals with ash, adjusting the vents to slow the burn. You help him with the final tasks, checking that the door is latched, that the shutters are secure, that the water bucket is full for morning. Before you go to your own bed, you step outside for a moment, pulling a coat around your shoulders. The night is clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. The village is dark except for the faint glow of a few windows, the last lights before sleep. Smoke rises from chimneys, visible as dark columns against the starlit sky. You breathe deeply, the air so cold it burns slightly in your lungs, and you feel a profound gratitude for the warmth waiting inside, for the fire that will smolder through the night, for the knowledge and skill that make survival possible. You think about all the people across the valley and beyond, in villages and hamlets scattered through the Alps, each one tending their own fires, each one navigating the challenges of winter with the tools and wisdom passed down through generations. You think about the forests that provide the fuel, the trees that grow slowly over decades, absorbing sunlight and rain and transforming them into the solid matter that can be burned to release warmth. You think about the iron and clay that form the stoves, mined and shaped and assembled by human hands. You think about the animals in the barn, the food in the larder, the wool and linen that clothe and cover you. All of this is connected, interdependent, a vast web of relationships between people and land and resources. The fire is the center, the axis around which everything else revolves, but it is not independent. It requires constant attention, constant work, constant foresight. It is a partnership, a conversation between human intention and natural process. You return inside and move quietly to your bed. The room is cool but not frigid, the stove radiating a gentle residual heat. You slip under the blankets and pull them up to your chin, feeling the day's fatigue settle into your bones. You hear the soft sounds of the house, a timber creaking, the wind brushing against the shutters, the faint tick of the stove as the metal expands and contracts. You close your eyes and let your mind drift. You think about spring, which is coming, which you can feel in the quality of the light and the behavior of the animals and the slow retreat of the snow. You think about the work that will come with the thaw, the planting, the rebuilding, the long days of labor in the fields and forests. You think about the next winter, which will arrive inevitably, and the preparations that must begin even as this one ends. But for now, in this moment, you are warm. You are fed. You are safe. The fire burns low but it burns, and that is enough. You feel the weight of the blankets, the softness of the straw mattress, the quiet presence of your family in the rooms around you. You feel the deep, abiding continuity of this life, the sense that you are part of something much larger than yourself, a tradition that stretches back through countless generations and will, if you do your part, stretch forward into countless more. Sleep comes slowly, gently, like the falling of snow. Your breathing deepens and slows, matching the rhythm of the house, the rhythm of the fire, the rhythm of the mountains themselves. You drift into dreams that are formless and peaceful, images of light and warmth, of hands shaping wood, of smoke rising into clear skies, of voices singing in fire-lit rooms. And somewhere in the night, the fire continues to burn, patient and tireless, transforming wood into heat, darkness into light, cold into comfort. It is a small miracle, repeated every night in every household across the valley, a miracle so common that it is easy to overlook, but no less miraculous for its familiarity. The fire burns, and life endures, and the long winter slowly gives way to spring. The snow has stopped falling outside your window, and in the stillness that follows, you understand that this silence is not empty but full of memory, full of the accumulated warmth of generations, full of the knowledge that what kept your ancestors alive was not merely fire or stone or wood, but the patient intelligence of people who learned to listen to their landscape and to answer its challenges with quiet ingenuity and unwavering resolve. You sit near the stove now, in the hours before dawn, when the coals glow deepest red and the darkness outside presses closest against the glass, and you think about all the hands that built this warmth, all the minds that conceived these solutions, all the bodies that carried wood and stone up impossible slopes so that others might survive the winter without breaking under its weight. The knowledge they accumulated was not written in books at first, not codified in manuals or blueprints, but passed from hand to hand, from mouth to ear, from demonstration to imitation, each generation adding its own small refinements to the techniques inherited from those who came before, each improvement tested against the unforgiving reality of Alpine cold, each failure mourned and learned from, each success celebrated quietly and then incorporated into the commonwealth of understanding that made survival possible in this vertical world of rock and ice and wind. You remember your grandmother's hands on yours, guiding your fingers to feel the texture of properly seasoned wood, teaching you to recognize by touch alone whether a log had dried long enough to burn efficiently or still held too much moisture to give good heat, and you remember how she never explained the reasons in abstract terms but simply showed you, over and over, until your hands knew what your mind had not yet articulated, until the knowledge lived in your muscles and nerves as much as in your thoughts. This is how it was done, for centuries, not through lectures or demonstrations divorced from necessity, but through the daily practice of survival, through the repetition of tasks that could not be postponed or delegated or ignored without immediate and often fatal consequences, through the accumulation of small attentions and careful observations that together formed a body of knowledge as complex and refined as any science, though it wore no such grand name and made no claims to universality beyond the particular needs of this particular place. The stove ticks softly as metal expands and contracts with the fluctuations of heat, and you listen to this rhythm as you might listen to a heartbeat, steady and reassuring, the sound of a system functioning as it was designed to function, as it has functioned for longer than you have been alive, as it will continue to function as long as someone tends it with the attention and respect it requires. Outside, the valley is still lost in darkness, though the quality of that darkness has begun to shift in ways almost too subtle to name, a faint dilution of the black, a suggestion of depth where before there was only flat opacity, the first hint that somewhere beyond the eastern peaks the sun has begun its patient climb toward the visible world. You think about the other houses scattered across these slopes, each one a small point of warmth in the immense cold, each one maintained by someone like you, rising in darkness to feed fires that must not be allowed to die, checking chimneys and flues, splitting wood, carrying water, performing all the small tasks that together constitute the great task of survival, and you feel a connection to these unseen neighbors that transcends words or formal acknowledgement, a kinship born of shared necessity, of common understanding, of the knowledge that you are all engaged in the same essential work. The warmth that surrounds you now is not merely physical, though the heat from the stove is real and precious, but also temporal, the warmth of continuity, of practices maintained across generations, of solutions that have proven themselves worthy of preservation not through ideological argument but through simple effectiveness, through the fact that they worked when they needed to work, that they kept people alive when alive was difficult to stay, that they transformed impossible conditions into conditions that could be endured and, in moments of grace, even enjoyed. You stand and move to the window, looking out at the darkness that is no longer quite absolute, and you can see now the outline of the nearest peaks against a sky that has begun to lighten from black to deepest blue, and you know that this transition, from night to day, from cold to warmth, from isolation to connection, is happening not just here but in every house in every valley throughout these mountains. Each household engaged in its own private negotiations with darkness and cold, each fire a small defiance of entropy, each warm room a temporary victory over the forces that would freeze all life into stillness and silence. The techniques your ancestors developed were not romantic gestures or nostalgic performances but practical responses to conditions that demanded practical responses, and yet there was artistry in them nonetheless, the artistry of solutions elegant in their simplicity, of systems that worked with rather than against the natural world, of buildings designed to capture and hold every possible calorie of heat while allowing smoke and moisture to escape, of communities structured to share resources and labor so that no household bore impossible burdens alone. You think about the thermal mass of the stone walls around you, still radiating heat absorbed during yesterday's fire tending, and you understand this as a form of temporal engineering, a way of spreading warmth across time, of making heat generated in one moment available in another, of smoothing out the extremes between the roaring heat of fresh fire and the creeping cold that follows when flames die down, creating instead a more moderate and sustainable temperature that can be maintained with less wood and less constant attention. The forest outside, was managed with the same long-term perspective, not clear-cut for immediate gain but harvested selectively, carefully, with attention to regeneration and sustainability, with an understanding that the wood needed this year must not come at the expense of the wood needed next year or 10 years hence, with rules and customs and communal agreements that ensured no individual could deplete the resource on which everyone depended. This was not selflessness but enlightened self-interest, the recognition that in a closed system like a mountain valley, the tragedy of the commons was not a theoretical problem but an immediate and visceral threat, and that therefore mechanisms had to be developed to prevent individual greed or desperation from destroying collective survival. Mechanisms enforced not primarily through punishment but through the steady pressure of communal expectation and the knowledge that one's reputation, once damaged, could not easily be repaired in a society where everyone knew everyone and memory stretched back generations. You move away from the window and check the water heating on the stove, testing its temperature with a fingertip, and you find it warm but not yet hot, another few minutes before it will be ready for washing, for tea, for all the small domestic purposes that require heated water, and you accept this delay without impatience, understanding that rushing the process would accomplish nothing, that heat moves at its own pace and cannot be hurried beyond certain limits, that patience is not a virtue imposed from outside but a practical necessity derived from the nature of the physical world. In the cities far below, people can turn a dial and have instant heat, can adjust temperature with the precision of single degrees, can forget entirely about the sources and mechanisms of their warmth, and you do not judge this as moral failing but simply recognize it as a different relationship to necessity, a different set of constraints and possibilities, a different bargain struck between convenience and self-sufficiency, between immediate comfort and long-term resilience. But here, in this house built by hands that understood cold in ways few modern people can comprehend, you maintain the older bargain, the one that requires more labor and more attention but also confers a certain kind of knowledge that cannot be gained any other way, the knowledge of your own competence, of your ability to meet your own needs, of your place within systems both natural and social that extend far beyond your individual life and will continue long after you are gone. The room has grown perceptibly warmer since you woke, and you can feel the difference not just in the air temperature but in the quality of the warmth. No longer the sharp distinction between the hot zone near the stove and the cold zones in the corners, but a more even distribution as the thermal mass of the building absorbs and radiates heat, as warm air circulates through the carefully designed spaces, as the whole structure functions as it was meant to function, as a machine for survival. Elegant in its efficiency, beautiful in its appropriateness to place and purpose. You think about the generations of refinement that went into this design, the centuries of small adjustments and improvements, of failed experiments and successful innovations, of knowledge accumulated through patient observation and practical testing, of builders learning from the mistakes and successes of their predecessors, each generation inheriting not just a structure but an understanding, not just a house but a philosophy of dwelling appropriate to this particular environment with its particular challenges and its particular gifts. The low door height was not merely practical but symbolic, a physical reminder of humility, of the fact that to enter warmth one must bow, must acknowledge the gift being given, must consciously choose to move from the dangerous realm of nature into the protected realm of culture, and though few people now articulate this symbolic dimension, the gesture remains embedded in the architecture, shaping behavior and awareness in ways subtle but persistent. You walk through the house now, checking each room, feeling the gradations of temperature, noticing how the warmth is strongest near the stove and cooler in the peripheral spaces, but nowhere truly cold, nowhere uninhabitable, the heat distributed with a fairness born not of mechanical precision but of thoughtful design, of builders who understood that a house must be not just warm but warmly various, offering different thermal zones for different activities and different times of day, allowing inhabitants to choose their comfort rather than imposing a single uniform temperature throughout. In the bedroom, where you slept under the thick down comforter that is itself a triumph of Alpine engineering, the transformation of goose feathers into an insulating layer light enough to be comfortable but dense enough to trap body heat and create a microclimate of warmth even in an otherwise cold room. You can see your breath, but only faintly, only as the slightest mist. And you know this means the room is cold but not dangerously so, cool enough for healthy sleep but not so cold that moisture from breathing will condense and freeze on the walls or windows. The balance is delicate, maintained through a combination of design features and daily practices, of closed doors and open vents, of fires banked at night to provide background warmth without the waste and danger of burning hot while everyone sleeps, of comforters and clothing and hot stones carried from the stove to the bed to create localized warmth where it is needed most. And all these practices together form a system as complex and refined as any modern heating installation, though one that requires constant human attention and adjustment rather than automatic mechanical control. You return to the main room and add another log to the stove, opening the air intake to encourage the flames to catch and spread, watching through the small window in the door as fire licks across the new wood, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, the bark catching and curling, the first wisps of smoke rising to be drawn up the chimney by the draft created by warm air rising and cold air descending, the whole system functioning according to principles understood by medieval builders, though they had no formal training in thermodynamics or fluid dynamics, only practical experience and careful observation and the willingness to learn from failure. The light outside has strengthened now to the point where you can see colors, not just shapes, the deep green of the pines heavy with snow, the pale gold of the larch trees that lost their needles months ago and stand now like skeletal hands against the sky, the brilliant white of new snow on the peaks beginning to catch the first direct sunlight, turning from gray to pink to blazing white as the sun clears the eastern ridges and pours light down into the valley like liquid gold into a cup. You watch this transformation, as you have watched it countless mornings, and it never becomes routine or boring but remains somehow miraculous, this daily resurrection of light, this return of color and warmth after the long darkness, this reminder that no matter how cold the night, morning eventually comes, the sun eventually returns, and life continues its patient work of resisting entropy and creating order out of chaos. The smoke from your chimney rises straight up in the still morning air, and you can see other columns of smoke rising from other houses scattered across the valley and up the slopes, each one a signal that fire has been tended, that warmth has been maintained, that another household has successfully navigated the dangerous passage of night and emerged into another day, and together these columns of smoke form a kind of community message, a visual confirmation of continued presence and functioning, of neighbors still there, still managing, still engaged in the endless work of survival. You prepare your breakfast now, using the warmth of the stove to cook as well as to heat, and you appreciate this efficiency, this double use of every flame, this refusal to waste any heat that can be captured and put to work, and you understand that this attitude, this careful attention to efficiency, this intolerance of waste, this determination to extract maximum benefit from minimum resources, is not stinginess or poverty mindset but rather a form of respect, respect for the labor required to produce each log of wood, respect for the forest that provided it, respect for the climate that makes such careful management necessary. The bread you toast on top of the stove browns slowly, evenly, and you turn it with your fingers, quick enough to avoid burning, and the gesture connects you to everyone who has ever cooked on a wood stove, who has ever judged heat by hand rather than by thermometer, who has ever developed through practice the intuitive sense of temperature and timing that cannot be taught from books but must be learned through repetition and attention. through the accumulation of small burnings and near misses. And perfect moments that together build a database of tacit knowledge your hands can access without conscious thought. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth of the food as much as its flavor, feeling the heat spread through your body from the inside now, complementing the external warmth of the stove and the house, and you think about how your ancestors understood that staying warm was not just about heating space but also about heating the body directly, through hot food and hot drinks, through physical activity, through clothing that trapped body heat and prevented its loss to the surrounding air, through every possible mechanism and strategy that could contribute even marginally to thermal comfort in an environment fundamentally hostile to human life. And yet they lived here, not just survived but lived, raised families and built communities and created culture, transformed these impossible mountains into a homeland, into a place of beauty and meaning and belonging, and this transformation was accomplished not through domination or exploitation but through adaptation and accommodation, through learning to work within the constraints rather than trying to overcome them through brute force, through developing technologies and practices that were sustainable across centuries rather than exhaustible within generations. The day is fully established now, the sun high enough to illuminate the valley floor, and you can see the village below, smoke rising from every chimney, paths already being cleared of snow, animals being tended, wood being split, all the daily tasks of winter mountain life being performed by people whose names you know, whose families you know, whose ancestors your ancestors knew, and this continuity, personal, familial, communal, is part of what makes the cold bearable, what transforms mere survival into actual living, what gives meaning to the work and purpose to the persistence. You put on your coat and boots, preparing to go outside, to begin your own day's work, checking on animals, clearing paths, perhaps cutting wood if the snow permits access to the forest, and as you do so you feel the warmth you are leaving, the warmth you will return to, the warmth that will be here because you ensured it would be here, because you woke in darkness and tended fire and performed all the small necessary tasks that together create the possibility of comfort and safety in an environment that offers neither naturally. The door opens onto cold bright air that catches in your throat, and you step out into it, into the day, into the work that needs doing, and behind you the house stands warm and solid, its stove burning steadily, its walls radiating stored heat, its design and construction embodying centuries of accumulated wisdom about how to create and maintain warmth in a place where warmth is always contested, always under siege, always requiring active defense against the cold that waits patiently outside. Every wall, ready to seep through any crack, any gap, any moment of inattention or neglect. You close the door carefully behind you, preserving the warmth within, and you feel the sharp contrast between the air inside and the air outside, and you understand this contrast as the fundamental challenge of alpine winter life, the maintenance of a temperature differential, the creation and preservation of an inside that is radically different from the outside, and the enormous investment of labor and intelligence and resources required to maintain that difference against the natural tendency toward equilibrium, toward cold spreading and heat dissipating until everything reaches the same frozen state. But the warmth persists, in your house and in all the houses visible from where you stand, because people persist in maintaining it, because the knowledge of how to create and preserve warmth persists across generations, passed down not as abstract information but as lived practice, as habits and skills and intuitive understanding, as a relationship to fire and wood and stone and air that is physical and emotional and practical all at once. You walk through the snow toward the woodshed, your breath visible in the cold air, and you think about all the other people doing similar tasks in similar conditions all across these mountains, and you feel connected to them not through communication or coordination but through parallel experience, through the fact that you are all engaged in the same essential work, all tending the same kinds of fires, all managing the same kinds of resources, all employing techniques and practices that link you not just to contemporary neighbors but to ancestors stretching back centuries, all the way to the first people who looked at these forbidding mountains and decided not to flee from their cold but to figure out how to live within it. The wood in the shed is stacked neatly, categorized by age and type, and you select what you need with practiced efficiency, choosing logs that will burn at the rate you need for the time of day and the tasks you have planned, and this selection process is itself a form of knowledge, A practical calculus that balances fuel efficiency against heat output, against convenience, against the rate of consumption and the need to preserve adequate supplies for the rest of winter, and you perform these calculations without conscious arithmetic, drawing instead on years of experience and the intuitive sense of proportion that comes from daily engagement with these decisions. You carry the wood back to the house, arms full, the logs cold and solid against your chest, and you appreciate their weight, their density, the potential energy stored in their cellular structure, the ancient sunlight captured by the tree through photosynthesis and now available to you as heat, as warmth, as survival. And this transformation, from light to wood to fire to heat, seems to you in this moment almost miraculous, a kind of temporal magic, a way of reaching back into the past and bringing forward the energy of summer days long gone to warm winter nights yet to come. Inside again, you stack the wood near the stove where it will warm and dry even further, where any remaining moisture will evaporate, so that when these logs finally enter the firebox they will burn with maximum efficiency, giving maximum heat with minimum smoke. And this attention to detail, this refusal to waste any opportunity for optimization, is characteristic of the Alpine approach to survival. Not obsessive or neurotic, but simply practical, born of necessity, refined through experience, maintained by tradition. The day stretches ahead of you, full of tasks that need doing, but for this moment you sit again near the stove, letting the warmth soak into your bones, and you think about how much of life in these mountains is about preparation, about anticipating needs before they become urgent, about maintaining systems before they break down, about the patient work of prevention rather than the desperate scramble of emergency response. And you understand that this orientation toward the future, this habit of thinking ahead, of planning and preparing and maintaining, is itself a kind of technology, as important as the design of the stove or the construction of the house, and far more difficult to learn because it requires not just knowledge but temperament, not just skill but character. Outside, the sun continues its arc across the winter sky, and you know that in a few hours it will begin its descent, and shadows will lengthen, and cold will deepen, and you will need to tend the fire again, will need to add wood and adjust vents and ensure that warmth continues through the coming evening and into the night beyond. And this knowledge does not burden you but rather comforts you because it is familiar, because it is the rhythm you have known all your life, because it connects you to everyone who has ever lived in this place and maintained warmth against the cold through the simple expedient of paying attention and doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done, over and over, without complaint or ceremony, until paying attention and doing necessary work become not obligations but identity, not tasks but ways of being in the world. The stove ticks and murmurs, the wood settles in the firebox, the heat radiates outward in invisible waves, and you sit in the center of this warmth and feel held by it, supported by it, and you understand that this is what your ancestors created, not just a system for heating houses but a way of life that could be sustained across centuries in conditions that would otherwise be uninhabitable. A culture built around fire and wood and stone and the careful management of all three, and though much has changed in the world beyond these mountains, though other ways of creating warmth have been invented and adopted and spread across the world, here in this house in this valley on this winter morning, the old ways persist, not as museum piece or nostalgic performance but as living practice, as the most appropriate response to the specific challenges of this specific place, and perhaps there is wisdom in that persistence. Perhaps there are lessons embedded in these old techniques that the wider world might still benefit from learning or relearning. You do not articulate these thoughts in exactly these words, but you feel them, you sense them, you carry them as a kind of background awareness that colors how you see your daily work, that gives significance to small tasks, that transforms mere survival into something richer and deeper, into a kind of dialogue with place and past and purpose, and this transformation is itself a form of warmth, not physical but psychological, not measurable by thermometer but real nonetheless, sustaining not your body but your spirit, your sense of meaning, your willingness to continue the patient work that winter demands. The fire burns on, as it has burned for centuries, as it will burn for as long as someone tends it, and in its burning is the whole history of human ingenuity, the whole story of adaptation and survival, the whole testament to what is possible when necessity meets intelligence and persistence, when people refuse to accept conditions as they are and instead figure out how to transform those conditions into something livable, something sustainable, something that can be passed down across Generations as gift and responsibility, as inheritance and obligation, as the accumulated wisdom of all who came before made available to all who come after. And you sit here now, in this moment of warmth, connected backward to ancestors and forward to descendants, sideways to neighbors and inward to yourself, and you understand that what you are maintaining is not just physical warmth but cultural warmth, not just a comfortable temperature but a way of being human in a difficult world, and this understanding settles over you like the heat from the stove, invisible but pervasive, warming you from the outside in and from the inside out, until you cannot say where the physical warmth ends and the other warmth begins, until it is all simply warmth, simply the good and necessary condition that makes life possible in this beautiful, harsh, unforgiving, beloved place. The morning deepens toward afternoon, the light shifting as the sun climbs higher, and you rise finally from your seat near the stove, ready now to face the day's work, fortified by warmth and breakfast and the quiet contemplation of how you came to be here, how anyone came to be here, how the impossible became possible through attention and effort and the patient accumulation of knowledge across time. And you carry this understanding with you as you move through your day, as you will carry it through your life, as it has been carried by everyone who has ever called these mountains home, this knowledge of warmth and how to create it and preserve it against the cold that waits always at the edges of the firelight, patient and powerful but not, in the end, unconquerable. The stove will need tending again in a few hours, and you will tend it, and in the tending you will participate once more in the ancient practice, the essential work, the daily small miracle of transforming wood into warmth, of holding back the cold for one more day, of ensuring that when night falls and temperatures drop and darkness presses against the windows, there will still be light, there will still be heat, there will still be the possibility of comfort and safety and continuation, and that is enough, that has always been enough, that will always be enough as long as someone remembers how it is done and is willing to do it. And for now, in this moment, in this house, in this valley, in these mountains where your people have lived for longer than memory reaches, you are that someone, you hold that knowledge, you perform that work, and in performing it you join the great chain of tenders of fire that stretches back to the beginning of human habitation in cold places and forward to whatever future awaits, and in that joining is a kind of immortality, not of the individual but of the practice, not of the person but of the knowledge, not of the body but of the warmth that bodies create and require and maintain through the patient application of intelligence to necessity, through the transformation of understanding into action, through the simple eternal work of keeping the fire burning through the long cold night until morning comes again with its promise of light and continuation and one more day of warmth preserved against the encroaching cold.